Good evening. Let's call to order and have a roll call.
Nancy Kupka.
Here.
Mike Davenport.
Here.
Dan Nicholas.
Here.
Terry Pavicic. Here. Rick Pavanato.
Here.
Joanna Vasquez Drexler.
Here.
Zoe Boyd. Here. Sam Bull.
Here.
Thank you. Let's stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. The first matter of business is the approval of minutes. I need a motion to approve the minutes from August 17th, 2020 business meeting, September 14th, 2020 workshop meeting, and September 14th, 2020 closed meeting.
So moved.
Terry?
Second.
Joanne?
Thank you very much. Terry Pavicic. Aye. Joanna Vasquez Drexler.
Aye.
Mike Davenport.
Aye.
Dan Nicholas.
Aye.
Rick Pavanato.
Aye.
Nancy Kupka.
Aye. Motion carries. We move on then to the first reception of visitors. The meeting agenda includes two opportunities for comments from the audience. This first reception of visitors is intended for audience members to address the board about any agenda item on which the board will vote. And I think you were going to post those items we're voting on tonight. The second reception of visitors is intended for audience members to address the board on any topic pertaining to Community High School District 99. Comments will be limited to 3 minutes to provide all visitors an equal opportunity to address the board. Individuals needing more time should submit their thoughts in writing to the board secretary, Mrs. Nidek. Visitors addressing the board need to come to the microphone and state their full name. The proceedings are being tape recorded for the purpose of producing accurate meeting minutes. The board's presiding officer, myself, I reserve the right to modify these protocols if circumstances warrant. Audience observation of these protocols is appreciated. Does anybody wish to address the board on any topic on which we're voting tonight? Hearing none, we'll move on to the recommendations and reports of the superintendent.
All right. So we'll start out with our two new student board members seated on the other side of the room here. And what we're going to do is just allow them to introduce themselves. So we'll start with Sam. Use the mic there, Sam. Yeah.
Okay, my name is Sam Bull, and the most notable things about me are that I'm the editor-in-chief of the school's newspaper, the DJ and I play soccer for the high school and my local club team. I'm the captain of both. And I'm just very, very excited to be here. A little bit nervous, but also very excited because since I've entered high school, I've been interested in impacting my community in any way that I can. And this is I see this as a grassroots government position, and I think that the things I can do here can help impact and help the student body and the community in a positive way. So I'm very excited, and thank you so much for having me here.
Welcome, Sam. Zoe?
Hi there, I'm Zoe. I'm a senior here at South, and something about me is I really love music and art. I do speech, and I'm the president of the Mask and Gavel Club here at South. And yeah, same as Sam, I'm really excited to be here, and it's been nice meeting some of you. Hopefully I'll get to know all of you.
Welcome, Zoe. Welcome.
Thank you for joining us. We're always happy to have our student board members, and we really appreciate all the information you can give us. So welcome.
Welcome.
Yes. Welcome aboard.
All right. The next item that we have is the 2021 school plan updated, the continual work on trying to return students to in-person learning. My remote doesn't like to work on the first click from here. So as we've started each of the meetings, just a review of how we've gotten here. I know the board has seen this slide many times, but just to review, a lot of work over the summer. And since we met the last time, this is all of the guidance that has come in since the school year started. And since we met last week, we've received updated guidance from the CDC on school metrics, and I'll explain kind of how that fits into the larger picture later on this evening. All right, so just a quick update on the changes in the school guidance. just has trouble making it all the way from here. So I've provided this to the board, and you've been able to see how the crosswalk works through this. We went through all of this last week as to how there's kind of the three categories at the state level. Substantial is the lowest possibility of bringing all students back, then moderate would be in the middle, obviously, and then minimal is what we kind of designed our plan towards, not knowing it because these didn't exist in the summer, to bringing students back. So what we're trying to do tonight is to present a pathway to bring students to school in moderate or minimal. The guidelines that came out from the CDC this week, I just put these up here. This is just to help you understand how this continues to develop. This is similar to guidance that we received at the state level, but not exactly the same. As we've seen all along, the guidance from the three different organizations don't always match up between the CDC, the IDPH, and the DuPage County Health Department. This just it's another piece of data to help us and another set of guidelines, especially as we move towards substantial, as we start trying to make the decision when we would no longer be able to bring students in, in the future. It's just another set of information as we sit down and talk with the DuPage County Health Department about what we should do next to help shape our decisions. We will rely more on the Illinois Department of Public Health and the DuPage County Health Department. Education in the United States is driven first by the state level in almost all other cases, so we're going to look at Illinois Department of Public Health as our number one metric. But these will help influence us since the way that it works in the state. Ultimately, they have left it up to the superintendent to determine if schools are open or not and how that works. So, we'll work on the state level first with advice from the county level. The health leaders at the county level are factoring in the CDC information as well. This is the slide that I brought you last week, and we've continued to work on it and develop it. Really, what it comes down to, and the key takeaway that folks should have from this, is that really, as long as we're in moderate or minimal, we're striving to build a schedule that allows students to come back in those ranges. As soon as we move into substantial, we're going to have some serious conversations with the health department if it's appropriate to continue to bring all students back to school for a hybrid model, and if it's appropriate to continue doing things like activities, athletics, and those kinds of things. However, for our students that are most at risk, we are continuing to try to build programming so that as long as we are in phase 4 or higher, that those students can continue to come in and receive services on a regular basis.
So Hank, before you leave this page, where are we at? If you had to put a star or a dot on this chart as to where we are at today, where are we at?
We are right in the middle of moderate.
Right in the middle, okay.
Okay,
Right in the middle of your chart.
Right. So that's where the current DuPage County Health Department metrics are as of today. And in comparison to when we were here a week ago, the numbers have actually improved in the last week. They've gone in the correct direction. And we greatly appreciate the community doing their part to keep those metrics going in the right direction. That's the best way that the community can help us get students to school and keep them here at school is to wear a mask, wash their hands, keep their 6 feet of social distance, and do all those things that the health professionals are saying to do. So if we go back, Dan.
At all times, not just in school.
At all times, yeah, at all times. So we'd be right in between the low and high moderate right now. I would have said a week ago we were starting to trend towards high moderate, and now we're starting to trend back the other way. So we're definitely in the space where bringing students back to school is something we should be considering doing. All right, I'm going to have somebody else click this in. All right, so what does this mean for our schedule coming back and what we're trying to do here? So let's go back to what we talked about this summer. And as we looked at a hybrid schedule this summer, these were our 3 top priorities. Obviously following the health and safety guidelines, trying to come up with a schedule where every student has the opportunity to see every teacher each week, and that we were scheduling remote learning experiences separate from in-person learning, from those 2 experiences. We administratively were scheduling those times separate from one another. As we've looked at the health guidelines and have tried to figure out how to do this in minimal and moderate transmission levels, our priorities have changed a little bit here. Obviously, following the safety guidelines, social distancing, but a new factor that was introduced under these new set of guidelines is limiting the mixing of groups. So in our old schedule, students changed their class periods 4 times each day that they were here. So that's 4 times that the groups mix. You're going to see in the new schedule, we've cut that number down to meet the new requirement that's in there, this new guideline. In order to do that, you're not going to see as many teachers as frequently, so we can't see every teacher every week. But we still want a regular cycle of where you see each teacher. And then we want to simplify the schedule. That's a major piece of feedback that we've heard about the old hybrid schedule versus coming back now, that it was too complex, too many moving parts. So that has become more of a priority than separating in-person and remote learning structurally. It has become simplifying the schedule, has kind of risen up as a greater priority. Okay. Thanks, Mark. All right, so hybrid is what we talked about over the summer. And you can see those priorities. And now you can see how they compare in the modified hybrid. So this just allows you to see them side by side, what I just told you. You know, good teaching, tell them, and then tell them again. Okay, so what we're going to have in this modified hybrid is this combination class period, this combination of in-person and remote learning happening in the same time frame. So the first class of the day will have students attending in person, and we'll have some time in that class period where students are attending remotely. So Group A will be there in person on some days, while Group B is still interacting with that class period in that time, but from home. Okay, and our remote learners are always learning from home, right? So they're combined in the same time, but work in different spaces. In that time, there's going to be a combination of interactive and independent work, just like there is in a regular class period. There's times where the teacher is directly interacting with a student or a group of students, and there's time when they're working on their own, independently. That will be mixed within a class period so that the teacher is spending time with the students that are there in person, but also spending time with students working remotely. There's also possibilities in this model for a student that's in the classroom to be paired up with a remote student and them to be working at the same time. So if that pair needs help, the in-person student could call the teacher over and ask the question and work that way. The idea is that there are going to be learning activities for all students every class period that class is meeting. What it looks like could be different from class to class. We'll always take attendance for all learners at the beginning of each class period. And then at the end of each class period, we wrap up that class and move on to the next class.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Can I ask?
Yeah.
So I know that we're going to look at a sample schedule from the teacher's perspective of how they're going to lay this out for their day, but what kind of activities are we doing for professional development for our teachers? Because I'm sure there are some that are not that comfortable doing this, and there are others that frankly are, so.
Yeah, you're stealing my thunder
Oh,
later,
okay.
but we will definitely
We'll
have
put that to the
professional
side.
development. Yeah, absolutely. We'll get there. All right, so here's the big concepts for this new schedule, right? That we were able to do it when transmission levels are in minimal or moderate, that we have always 6 feet of distancing between people, right? We're building that into the planning. That we have all the health and safety protocols in place, that we are going to follow the remote learning schedule as kind of our base, okay? We're going to build off of that. If you remember, that is a schedule that was designed with the committee of teachers over the summer. After the hybrid was debuted, then we pulled together a group of teachers to work on fully remote. So we're going to try to stick to that schedule as close as we can, and I'll explain some of the factors that play into that in a little bit. One of the things that this allows is that students would initially come in for half days. In that half-day meeting, there'd be 2 class periods. So remember last week we started talking about a student's cohort and a staff member's cohort. We want to limit the number of people in somebody's environment throughout the course of a day, right? We're trying to keep that number under 50. It just limits the number of opportunities you have to come in contact with somebody that may have COVID. So the idea of a single passing period then has one time each day where all students mix. That period of time is 5 minutes or less, because that's the length of a passing period. During that time, we will not have all of the students in the building, we'd have half. And then we have all of the safety measures in place, the face coverings, the face shield, encouraging people to have social distancing, no congregating in hallways, no use of the washroom during passing periods, no lockers, right? Students go from point A to point B. So it should be far less than 5 minutes that anybody would be mixing with the larger group of students. In the conversations with walking these models through with the DuPage County Health Department, they felt that that was absolutely appropriate in the moderate and minimal transmission levels. Then the other 2 times where they could come in contact with just large groups of students would be upon arrival. That's always staggered. And remember, as part of the plan, students come in and go directly to their classroom. There's no gathering in the hallways, there's nothing in the cafeterias. Students come in, go directly to their first class for that day and go to their seat. Then at the end of the day, we would release students similar to how we do for assemblies and those kinds of things, which is, could be by floor, it could be by floor, even in odd classrooms, those kinds of things, so that not every student is coming out of the classroom at the exact same time, right? To make it easier for people to maintain their social distancing as they leave the building at the end of that day. In the model you're about to see, students coming into school for 2 days a week for half days. And this is initially, right? We get this in place. Hopefully metrics continue to improve and we're able to expand that over time. Over a 2-week period, they will meet in all of their classes and see all of their teachers. And we will continue to run specific programs or activities, so TCD, the way that it's running, activities, athletics, and T99. Okay, so we will continue those additional opportunities for our students. So in this model, if you are an in-person learner, trying to keep all my screens lined up here. it's very important that students and families know that we are very serious about following all of those safety guidelines. And the only way that a student can continue to come to school is to follow those safety guidelines. Wearing the PPE, wearing the shield during the hallways and on the buses, so social distancing, hand hygiene, cleaning and disinfecting, the symptom checks before they come to school. Those are all of the things that must happen for a student to continue to attend school in person. While they're here, we want to maximize their learning experience as much as possible and try to tailor in the things that really can only happen while they're here at school. And then there's a lot of remote learning time as well in this, and we'll talk about what happens in that time in a second. But if you remember last week when we talked, one of the challenges is when we come back to in-person, a reduction in the amount of time, right? Because right now, all students are virtual, they have the entire class period all to the teacher. Once we move to this model, and we can only bring in half the students at a time, so you're going to have some students learning remotely and some students learning in person, there's naturally going to be a reduction in the effectiveness of the minutes during that time. Everything is trade-offs, right? So for the time that students are here, though, we want to maximize that time and have experiences that would be very difficult to have remotely while they're in person, and then shift the things that do work remotely to the remote sessions. The idea here obviously is about relationships and strengthening those with the teacher, with other students, actually with the building itself and the community and those kinds of things. During this time, it's very difficult to do quick formative assessments, check-ins, and those kinds of things in a remote fashion. Some of them that you need them to do, so especially performance-based. So some of those will shift back into the in-person time. As I said earlier, our in-person students might be collaborating with other students that are there in person, but they might also be collaborating with someone that's remotely. In some ways, it's easier to social distance if you're collaborating with a remote learner, if you're an in-person learner. Yeah.
But will the remote learners still have, I mean, there will be office hours in that, so remote
Yeah.
learners can still,
We'll still have the resource periods, we'll still have the office hours.
Thank you.
Yep. Students are going to have to then bring their Chromebook and headphones and microphone to class because they could be participating with a remote learner while they're there. And this is also one of the great challenges we have right now is getting materials to students and getting materials back. This naturally then creates a cycle where that can occur. For our remote learners, remember, in this model, nearly everybody is a remote learner for some of the time and an in-person learner for some of the time, except for families that have chosen to be fully remote. If you're remote learning in either of those ways, as the hybrid going back and forth or a fully remote learner, you'll be participating in direct instruction learning activities in the same class period as the in-person learners. So you remember the model from this summer, those two were separate. Now they're brought into the same space, and our teachers will be deciding how that time and space flows, and I'll show you some examples of how that might work in a second. The structure, types, and timings of activity is going to differ from subject area to subject area, from teacher to teacher, class to class, depending on what that individual class needs, both based on their curriculum and based on the students that are in there. And remember, we're going to have some classes where more students might be fully remote because they choose to do that, and some might be slightly more in person, and the teacher is going to have to adjust for those variables as well. Students and teachers are responsible for meeting the instructional goals when remote learning, just like when they are in-person learning. And then our fully remote learners, so those that aren't coming back for in-person, will have an opportunity to participate with that in-person group. They'll sign in just like everybody else is, and then activities will be structured for them. And it might make sense in one class for that remote learner to be a remote in-person learner that day, like participating with the in-person class and doing the same activities that the in-person students are doing or a modification of those on one day. It might make sense that they're not with the in-person learners that day and they're participating with the remote learners that day. It's very dependent on what's happening in the class, which is why we're not administratively carving out separate times for remote learners and in-person. We're turning it over to the professional in the classroom to determine how that should flow within that class period. All right, so a reminder, that's what the fully remote learning schedule looks like now. Okay, so 2 periods in one half of the day, the other 2 periods in the other half of the day, rotating through odd and even number class periods. Monday is fully remote, and that's the one day a week where moving forward in the hybrid model, that was the one day a week where a teacher got to see all of their kids at one time, just dedicated to them in the same format, right? All fully remote. So in this proposed modified hybrid, in week 1, Group A would come in on Tuesday and Wednesday and go through half of their courses over those 2 days. They would see their cohort of people that they would be coming in contact with would consist of whoever they went to school with transportation-wise, walking, riding the bus, in a car, any of those kinds of things, plus the students in 2 of their classes that are cut in half, and this is the number of students that are there. While they're in those classes, they'll be participating with the rest of the students in that same class in different shapes and format during that same time period.
I'm sorry.
Yep.
Can you just remind me, because it's going to be 2 periods and 2 periods. Period 0 is?
Is our 0-hour period, which it's like the early bird class. There's not a lot of students that are involved in that, but we have a few.
A couple handfuls, or?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. It's a very small number of 0-hour classes. Then the next week, Group A would come once again Tuesday and Wednesday, so their days of the week stay the same. Remember, we're trying to keep things as consistent as possible in a world full of inconsistencies. So their day remains as Tuesday and Wednesday, but in the second week, they come in the afternoons and do their afternoon courses. If you're in Group B, it's the same kind of experience, except you come in on Tuesday or Thursday and Friday, week 1, and do your morning classes. And then you come back the next week on Thursday and Friday in the afternoons and do your afternoon classes. And that's kind of the feel. Now, we've presented this using the times that are on the remote learning schedule, and we hope to stick as close to those as possible. However, as I'll explain later, one of our major challenges is transportation. And folding our transportation in with 68 and 58 may cause us to have to, that break in the middle, kind of push those minutes around between those 2 class periods so that buses will run and match up with the other 2 school districts. So some examples of how this might work in the flow of a class period. So here's the first example, and up here I've put for you what's occurring for the in-person learners and the remote learners, and a sample duration, right? Just to get a feel for how this might actually work. So the beginning of every class is all of the students there, in person and remotely, so attendance can be taken, expectations can be set for the class period, everybody knows when they're coming and going and what the schedule is for that class. Then in this example, we start with the remote learners getting some individual practice. Maybe they already got the learning before, they're coming in, they're getting to work, and getting help from the teacher as they work through whatever they're doing. You know, they can call for the teacher to come over at certain points while the teacher is doing direct instruction. You might think, how does that work? Well, it might be that the teacher is teaching this remote group, and then they have a time where the students practice there. Now they can go check on their other in-person students in that middle period of time. And then we flip those two groups, where one is doing the practice and the other is getting direct instruction. Then we get a little break in the middle of it. One of the things that we've heard is that these 80-minute periods, teachers really need to try to build in a time for getting up, stretching, taking a break, those kinds of things. So trying to build that into their scheduling and planning. And then in this model, it just flips back the other way for the other half of the class period. So this is a very simple example of trading off instruction and practice. They could get more complex than that. You know, here's an example of an activity going on with the in-person learners. So we start off the class period, and then the in-person learners are getting their materials together. They're going and doing whatever hands-on activity that they're working on, while the teacher is working with the remote learners. Okay, so obviously they set up the activity, the kids are ready to go, and they just go and work over on the side. Now during that direct teacher instruction, the teacher might have to take a break and go check on all of the students, right? Might have to pause, those kinds of things. And then after that activity is done, now we're going to work with the in-person group to do a little class discussion about the experience. And while they're doing that, the remote learners are working on some independent activities, right? And they get their break in that time, and now the teacher's back working with the in-person students. And then at the end, we now turn it back over. The in-person students are working on their individual wrap-up from that activity, their own individual assignments, while the teacher goes back and checks in on the remote learners and maybe provides a demonstration of the activity that just happened with the in-person students. And we wrap everything up, and that's the end of a class period. So hopefully you're seeing kind of how could be these trade-offs back and forth, but in the final example here.
But even in the
Yep.
room, students are not working, they're not sharing materials. If they're working in small groups.
If they're
still
sharing
6
materials, they're wiped down between
wiped
each
down
student
between-
and those
okay.
kinds of things, yeah. Yeah. Here's another example of trading back and forth. But I'm giving you 3 kind of examples so you can kind of see the trade-offs. But at any point, you could blend those and combine those activities. So maybe in this one, you can see how they trade back and forth. Homework check, video instruction while they do homework check. It might be appropriate in another day to do all the homework check for all the students at the same time, right? We're just going to go over homework with the kids that are in class and the kids that are remote. And then we're going to go into some direct instruction, and me as the teacher, I'm going to teach the students that are in person and the students that are remote at the same time. I might choose to do it that way, or I might choose to do it this way, where I break the groups up. Either way, it's going to be up to me to determine as the classroom teacher what the appropriate flow and breakup of the groups and an activity is throughout that course of the class period, which is, I mean, very different from how we do it during normal school, but it's also very similar in the fact that the teacher has the autonomy in every class period to figure out how they're working with different groups of students, what activities are going on, how the structure works in any class period. So what we're looking at is this schedule for the remainder of the semester. And so what you're going to see is a flow here of, once we get up and going, of a remote week followed by week 1 followed by week 2. And then a remote week, week 1, week 2, a remote week, week 1, week 2, then a remote week to end out the semester. There's some logic as to why this is happening. The first thing is we're trying for the rest of the semester here to balance out minutes is one of the reasons, right? And in the fully remote, as we said before, students get the most minutes of content in the fully remote because every student's getting the same thing in that same time and space. Once we start getting into hybrid, now we're trading off groups, right, in many of the classrooms. So the the experience is very different, and the direct minutes that you're getting from a teacher are very different. So by combining the two, of having some periods of remote learning and some periods of hybrid learning, we try to bolster the amount of time available for a teacher and a student over the course of the rest of the semester. Some of the other things in play here are we also want some time to adjust. So after we go through a 2-week rotation, then we have an adjustment period. And then we have a 2-week rotation, then we have an adjustment period. Those other remote weeks are also weeks in which the schedule is abnormal to begin with. So October 12th is the week of Monday is off, Tuesday we're in session, Wednesday is SAT testing for seniors, Thursday we're back in session, but some of our seniors have accommodations and have extended time for testing, so that day will be altered for some of our students. And then Friday is parent-teacher conferences. Thursday night and Friday during the day are parent-teacher conferences. So that's a week that's already challenging. So we didn't want to get into the full cycle until we had a chance to do back-to-back weeks. Just so that teachers can consistently plan between all of their classes, kids can have a common experience. So as we look at that, that makes October 19th our first opportunity to get a normal cycle back-to-back of week 1, week 2. What we're starting to talk about, and first we're planning for all students, and now we're backing up to that first week of October. We would like to try to do a dry run that week of week 1 and potentially bring in 9th grade only for that week. And I can't promise that we're going to make that happen yet. We still have a lot of logistics, some which I'll explain to you in a second, to work through. But that's our goal, is to bring students in that fashion that would allow us to test transportation and to see how it all works and learn from it before we bring all of our students back. But I'll get into the limiting factors that we have to work through critically before that's able to occur. Once we're up and going, beginning October 19th, we plan on following this all the way up to winter break in this rotation cycle. We want families to know this is the plan. As long as we are not insubstantial, this is how we will continue to work for the rest of the semester. We'll evaluate as this is going on to see if we can modify, change, improve going into second semester. But we just want everybody to be able to have it on their calendar. They know when they're coming to school. Teachers know what to plan for. Like everybody, we heard from our students last week, the unpredictability, the uncertainty, our students want to know what's coming next. I'm sure our families do as well, and I know our teachers do. This provides a pathway forward for the rest of the semester for how that could work. All right, so a lot of planning and logistics between now and when that happens. The first is making sure that all of our classrooms we can maintain social distancing in. As we've explained over the summer, we have many classrooms across the district that are relatively small, and we put smaller classes in them. But even so, when half of our students could potentially show up in one of those classrooms, they won't fit and maintain 6 feet of social distancing. So one of the things we did this summer by asking families to commit to remote learning was to then lower the number of students in classrooms because of fully remote learners, and some of those classes then fit. Other ones still didn't fit, but then we were able to swap other classrooms around so that every class had a classroom where students could maintain social distancing. Well, we got to restart that again because we don't know who's going to, now that they see this plan and how it works and they know where we are in the world and everything else, something that somebody committed to in August, they might think differently about now. So we need to recycle through that process and give families the opportunity to decide. Are they coming back for the hybrid model here for the rest of the semester, or they like to stay or be in a fully remote learning model. We're going to send that form out tomorrow and ask families to commit to one model, to fully remote learning or coming back in person by Friday, so that we can start all of that scheduling process over the next week to try to set everything up for students to come back. That is a lot of work to do in just a couple of weeks here. So the idea of bringing back ninth graders on the week of October 5th, if we can get through all of that and everybody responds, the more people that respond to the form that goes out tomorrow, the faster this will go. Because if somebody doesn't respond, then we have to follow up with each student and find out if they're coming or not. So a lot of this depends on the responsiveness of our school community in helping us get the information that we need. We already sent out information about busing last week so that we can start to work on our transportation, because we have to make sure our routes can maintain as much social distancing as possible. We also have to coordinate those routes with our partner elementary districts. So all of this, trying to get freshmen back on the 5th, is a lot of, it depends if we get all of the information we need in a timely fashion and we can make all of the puzzle pieces fit together in enough time so that families know who's coming in when, how the buses are working, everything's in place. And we have to make sure that that fits together with the elementary schools, with all of our timing and our routes and everything else. So there is a lot of work left to do over the next couple of weeks. At the same time, to go back to your question earlier, Nancy, we have a lot of professional development planning and supports to put in place for our teachers. Obviously now they have a new schedule for the remainder of the semester. They have curriculum that they have built out to right now be working in fully remote learning that needs to now be restructured to work in this new. They also now have this new responsibility to plan for classes where learning is happening in person and also happening remotely. That there might be some interactive learning in that time period with in-person learners and remote learners, but there's also going to be independent time built into that space. So teachers need time to lesson plan and put that all together. And we want to avoid this dip that we talked about last week, where if we make this happen too quickly, teachers aren't going to have enough time to plan, to learn, to be effective in this new model, and then we see a dip in the progress. We don't want that to happen. We want students to come back to teachers that are prepared for this new learning model. We also want to make sure we have opportunity to do some professional development on trauma-sensitive professional learning, some professional learning on trauma sensitivity, as we know that students are going to come back in very different spots with the way that the world is right now, and we want to be able to respond to student needs. We also have some technology that we're putting in place. Every teacher is going to be issued their own voice amplification device, so it's a little headset and a speaker that sits on their hip that amplifies their voice, like this microphone is doing for me now, because we know hearing people with a mask on is a challenge. And then also, if you're trying, teachers that might try to work with both groups at the same time, that would be even more challenging if their voice wasn't amplified. So those are arriving right now and are coming in. As you can imagine, there's a lot of demand for that kind of technology, so we placed orders for that weeks ago and they're arriving now. So that expands the possibilities of students being able to understand what's going on in the classroom, both in person and remotely. And then we started to look at today the possibility of earbuds and microphones for all students. We know that some students are just working from their speakers and their microphone on their Chromebook at home without that additional technology. We're trying to find out if we can get a deal to just make sure that every student has that supply as they come through the door. So that's something that we started talking about today and hope to know more about that, but it's something that we're trying to see if we can investigate and figure out. As you can imagine, there's been a great run on earbuds and microphones as well. So that's actually, in bulk, a difficult piece of technology to get a hold of. So a lot to work through as we try to get students back. All right, so that's where we're at. Questions from the board?
So in that last piece for the professional development, is it going to be the department chairs? Do we have, certain
So-
teachers have already been identified as exemplars? How is that going?
It'll be a combination of instruction that we provide, or professional development that we provide for all teachers at the same time, as well as the other things that we have in place with instructional coaches, lunch and learns, drop-in sessions, one-on-one coaching. So it'll be the full breadth of what we offer. You know, it's a tough balance with teachers, because teachers also are going to want that time that they have to plan and prepare and get everything in order. If we're making them all attend professional development that some teachers need and others may not, then we're actually wasting teacher time for some people, right? So it's a balance of determining what professional learning do all teachers need in this new model versus what are the ones that people need to self-select and go to, you know? And it's a difficult balance to know exactly what that is. But, you know, this district has dedicated a lot of resources to instructional coaching. Our librarians that don't have students back yet have been doing a lot of student support virtually, but they've also been doing a lot of staff support, virtually and in person, working as coaches as well. And we have a lot of staff resources to help teachers learn.
Tara?
I just have a couple of quick questions.
Tara, could you move your microphone closer?
I'm sorry.
Thanks.
Before I thought I was too loud. But are we putting groups of students together so that, let's say freshmen, you know that they're going to be in, English, math, and social studies, and having them kind of together so that if there is students that come with COVID, that we can kind of quarantine a group together?
Yeah, so, no, because that would require us to completely rebuild the schedule, which,
Yeah.
I mean, that's a 3 to 6 month process to build student schedules. Instead, that's the whole idea of this schedule model, is to limit the number of students that somebody could come in contact with on a daily basis, and to design the format so that close contact doesn't happen, right? That social distance is maintained, and as long as somebody is not within 6 feet of a person that has COVID for 15 minutes or more, it's considered low risk of them picking it up from somebody who has it. So we're trying to build the conditions so that close contacts don't happen.
And then my other thing is you said that they weren't going to be using the bathrooms
During passing period.
passing periods. So what if they want to wash their hands and use the facilities?
So in that's a great question. In every classroom, we have hand sanitizer. So we've put a hand sanitizer dispenser this summer in every classroom in the building, so they can at least do hand hygiene as they move from place to place. And then that's the idea of teachers building in somewhere in that class period a break time, so that students can either also, they can allow students to freely go during a period of time, or, they'd have to individually dismiss students to go during the class period. But the idea then is that students are fewer students are pressuring the washrooms at the exact same time, and it's less likely that they're in that same space with a lot of people at the same time.
Okay. And then my last question is, I know that you're in contact with 58 and 68 because of the bus schedules and all of that. Any idea when they can firm up whether or not they're going to be using?
Yeah, we hope they're going, I think, both of them are next week, I believe. At least 58 goes to the public next week with what they're thinking of doing. So they're still working on their planning as well, and they're talking to us. Obviously, we're getting some advanced insight as to what's going on, but that's firming up this week as well.
Okay, so by the end of the week, we should.
I would say
or
by the end of this
month,
week, yeah,
by
we
the end
should
of the
have a good
month.
idea if it fits in.
Okay.
You know, one of the things that we're trying to avoid is, one of the possibilities here, the difficult part in feathering the buses together is that middle. In the bus runs in the middle, depending on when 58 and 68 are picking up and dropping off students, the midday bus run is where there could be a lot of congestion, depending on when class days are beginning, ending, moving. You know, if other school districts are looking at half-day model, you know, there's all of these models that are out there like ours are, and as we try to fit them together, one of the possibilities could be the only option available to us is an AM slot or a PM slot, that the middays don't match up, right? So there is a possibility that we have to mess with the schedule and put all the classes always happening in the morning or all of the classes always happening in the afternoon. We're trying very hard to avoid that, right? We want this to, like, you always know for the rest of the semester when period 1 is happening, right? You always know when period 5 is happening. We don't want to add complexity of PM classes happening in the AM and all these other different iterations that could happen. So that's why it's taking time to make sure that our schedule fits inside a 58 schedule, fits inside a 68 schedule, and theirs is moving and shifting while ours is moving and shifting. So the logistics of the busing is very challenging.
2 questions. Do you guys know what 58 and 68 are? Okay, so 58 is primarily the elementary schools and middle schools in Downers Grove, and 68 is Woodridge and some Downers Grove and some other folks in there. So that's, with our elementary schools, we share buses.
And we share, bus service between the 3 school districts. So this is a big Tetris puzzle that has to fit together.
So when we ask people if they're going to commit, and I should know this, I'm sorry, when we ask people if they're going to commit to coming in for hybrid, are we also asking them if they're committing to bus service or if they're going to get their children here?
We already asked about bus service last week because we, as we said last week, it's a chicken and egg problem, right? You need to know certain things so you can plan certain things. So we asked families not even knowing what the schedule would look like and said, we're working on a schedule where students could need to be bused in the morning, in the middle of the day, at the end of the day. Based on that, are you still interested in bus service? And if so, when would you need service? Beginning of the day, mid of the day, select all that apply. So that we could start looking at what our bus numbers are, so we know what our utilization could be, so that then we could go to the bus company and start talking about, do any of these schedules work? So we already asked for that information last week. This week, we'll ask for, are you returning to in-person or remote? And that's the next piece we need to build the actual class schedules within the building. And then we try to get all these moving pieces to kind of solidify and gel together.
Any other questions?
Okay.
And then Dan.
Are we still trying to split the kids alphabetically, A through L?
Yes.
So how is that going to work in a class where 3/4 of the class is in one side versus the other? So, I'm just, what if you had a class where 80 or 90% of the kids, their last names start with, M or
They typically
R?
don't, believe it or not. The ones that it is a little skewed one way or the other, the remote learners have helped us balance it out, or that's one of the reasons why we've had to shift classes, because it might have been a small class, but on one of the days, 60% of the kids are coming, and on the other day, it's 30%. So that's why we have to carefully look at the rosters for every class period and make sure that they fit socially distanced into the classroom in which they're assigned. So that work that we did in August to get ready to come back, under the old plan, we need to redo now, because I think it's unfair to assume that somebody that committed to hybrid or remote, under the plan that we proposed in the summer, it's not fair to make them commit to this new plan now based on how they committed before. We need to give families the opportunity to select. Plus, everybody knows more about COVID now. Everybody has seen the metrics now. There's more information that might make somebody feel more comfortable sending, or they've also experienced remote learning at home. You know, you might have a student right now that is ready. They were afraid to come back in August, but they're ready to come back now, right? You could have the opposite. You could have a family that in August thought, I'm sending my student to school, I hated remote learning in the spring, and now they're looking at it and going, well, this is working for my child, so I think that we're just going to keep riding remote, right? So we don't want to make those assumptions for our families. We want our families to choose and select and tell us what model of learning is best for them.
This plan that we're looking at right now is the result of a great deal of work by not only our administrative staff, but teachers have been involved in this as well.
Yes, the scheduling committee that formed the fully hybrid or the fully remote schedule in July and August are the ones we went back to, and we presented 2 different schedule models to them. That it wouldn't be fair to say that they built this from scratch, but it's based on their work from this summer. And we brought them this model that you see, or a different model, and said, based on this, what do you think works best? We also took that to our department chairs, which are also
Teachers.
in the classroom teaching. And of course, the administrative team reviewed this as well.
Right. So, because I know that just knee-jerk reaction, trying to have some students in class and have kids remote, on the surface, that seems like it could be a little complicated, but your examples, I think, show how that might happen, and we've had teacher feedback to say, yeah, we can do this.
Yeah, the other models require us to decide for the classroom teacher how much time is going to an in-person group and how much time is going to a remote group, and you likely think naturally you should make that equal, so you split it down the middle. But as you see in these examples, on a day-to-day basis, that might not be what each group needs, right? It might not match the goals and curriculum of the teacher in that classroom on that day, and any variety, or the needs of the actual students that are in front of them. And if administratively we build a schedule like we did this summer, where we try to separate those 2 groups, it becomes much more complex. It becomes much more difficult to follow, and then everybody has to fit into that same box. When we do it this way, it does require more planning, I think, from our teachers, all right? But it allows our teachers the autonomy to determine how time and activity should be structured inside of the class period. So it's all trade-offs. There is no great model right now. What we're all trying to do is to choose the best of the worst. I mean, that's really the world that we're living in right now. And I think when we stack up all the pros and cons and put them together, and we looked at it over models that were intentionally separating in-person from remote learners, or putting them together in the same kind of time frame and working with them, the advantages of this model outweighed the advantages of the other model.
Do we have examples of schools that are using this, teaching both in person and online at the same time?
Yes, we do. It's hard to compare because they're not the exact models. It's also hard to compare because it's different teaching staffs. It might be a K-8 school versus, a high school district, but there's definitely professional forums out there and professional organizations that are providing best practices, tips, ways to make it work. I think we are definitely an advantage over the fact that we have pretty good technology in this district in comparison to other districts in the country. We're supplementing this with the voice amplification devices, which is something that we've heard from other schools that, it's difficult to hear sometimes that teacher across, the video chat if their voice isn't amplified. And we also know it's difficult to hear it in the classroom through a mask if it's not amplified. So we have taken this opportunity to learn many things from our peers, but we have a lot to learn ourselves.
So last time we were together, some concerns brought up about the minutes, and then we're hearing now with this plan, we're trading off, right?
Correct.
I think the point I made was that in the end, the goal is, of course, safety for all concerned, but ultimately, we have a curriculum that we're trying to get through effectively, and as long as we can get over that goal line, that's what really counts, because a minute is a minute is a minute, right? So, I'm assuming there's still great confidence in this plan, even with that trade-off, that we can get over that goal line. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
I mean, the importance is that students are learning and progressing, and we're meeting their needs. And as I've said all along, there's trade-offs here in those things. I think that in the fully remote model, there's definitely some needs and some experiences that we just can't effectively offer.
Right.
And this model, although causing a jumble in the minutes and maybe a reduction in minutes, may increase the experience, right? So what we do know from all of the research on minutes, all of the research points to, it's what happens in those minutes, the quality of instruction in those minutes fully outpaces the raw number. Now, look, you got to have enough, right? You've got to teach to what's there, but the experience and the quality of the teacher and the quality of the instruction is of far greater importance than the raw number. I don't, obviously you have to have enough, but I think that we're doing a nice job here of trying to balance them and then providing, that teacher autonomy in the classroom to determine what their students need for who's in front of them and what they're trying to teach, is trying to hit that sweet spot by having those rotating weeks of fully remote in there because of the weird scheduling and calendar and those kinds of things. Allows a couple of weeks where you could infuse minutes back in for all students, and hopefully the learning is bolstered by those in-person experiences in between. We sent out our first round of surveys for feedback over the last week. Students got theirs today. We'll be presenting on that the next time we meet in October. And we'll continue to survey staff, students, families on their experience and adapt and change and get better as a result of it.
So we heard last week that, I believe starting last week, there are a group of students at both North and South that would be doing their classes remotely, but from school because of major technology issues. When we go to this new hybrid schedule, if those students are here anyway, will they be in class all day, following their schedule, or still following a remote schedule in a separate room or separate area?
It depends on what this family has selected and what they're doing, right? But likely for the classes that are meeting in person, they'll go into their in-person group, right? We don't want students crossing between Group A and Group B. We want to keep those as their unique cohort. So if they're in the first half of the alphabet, they'll go into their in-person classes, assuming that that's what their family has selected, for 1 week, the mornings, and then the next week, the afternoons on Tuesday and Thursday. But then when they're not in those in-person classes, they would go somewhere in the building while the rest of their classes are learning remotely and continue to work remotely, because obviously sending them home at that point, they don't have the resources.
Right, we don't want to, I just want to make sure we weren't exposing those kids to additional cohorts of,
Correct.
the B group.
Yeah, they'd
or
still
C.
be in kind of their small cohort, and they're working in small settings right now. It's not large groups of students in any of these settings.
Any other questions? Well, I know this works, although you've summed it up in less than an hour. This really does represent.
Hey Nancy, one of our student board members.
Oh, I'm
had a
sorry.
question.
Please, go ahead. Sorry, I didn't see your hand.
No, that's okay.
Don't be shy.
No, so I understand that transportation's already been a challenge, but I wanted to know, is there a plan in place for overseeing safety procedures, like to and from school on the bus?
Good question.
Yeah, there is a procedure in place for bus ridership to make sure safety procedures are followed. So if we're going to go through like a day in the life of a student as they ride the bus, They should arrive at their bus stop with their self-certification slip. There will be an adult on that bus that will check to make sure that everybody has on their PPE, their face covering and their shield, and has their slip. And then they will come in and be seated in a seat by themselves. And any student that doesn't have their self-certification slip, we will take their temperatures and make sure they're not running a temperature and ask them if they're experiencing any of the COVID-like symptoms. If they are, they won't be allowed to board the bus and will have to go home. Assuming that they pass the symptom check, then they get on the bus with their PPE and face shield. If they don't have that, we will provide a temporary one for them. Then they go to school and they get in, and then at the end of the day, they board the bus just the opposite way. We don't have to do symptom checks at that point, and they head on back home. There will be both the bus driver and a bus monitor on every bus to make sure that that happens effectively. At least for the first 6 weeks here, we will staff it that way and see how it goes. You know, the first 6 weeks of hybrid rotations.
Hey, instead of having a sheet of paper, couldn't they just fill out a Google form and show them on their phone?
Yeah, we talked through that, but there's some equity issues, there's tech issues, there's all of those kinds of pieces. When we broke it all down, just the slip was...
But some people don't have a printer and ink.
No, we issued that. We issued a booklet of slips to every student
okay.
at the start of the year. So we made kind of the hall pass idea for every student to come to school.
And speaking of symptoms, you mentioned a couple of weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, or 3 meetings ago, they all blend together now. There were some rules from the health department that if you had symptoms, you couldn't go back to school without testing, and there's all sorts of, are those rules still in place?
They are still in place. However, the change that I referenced last week was that for many of the symptoms, it's if they're new. So if they are ongoing known symptoms, like you have migraines, and it feels like a migraine, it's just another migraine, that's not a new symptom. That doesn't prevent you from returning to school, assuming you can come to school and learn with a migraine, right? Same thing for allergies or those kinds of things. If it's a brand new symptom, then you have to go through your 10-day isolation period, or you need to get your doctor to say this isn't related to COVID, that it is some other ailment, and you're supposed to test negative using one of 2 specific tests to then come back before the 10 days is up.
How are we going to monitor that?
So that's, we have our nurses team in the building, and then we've also contracted an additional outside agency nurse at North, South, and T99 to help with the volume of work that we expect will come with that.
So simply having a negative test is not enough to come back. You need to have a provider say, yes, you're negative, because not all, you can be positive, you can have COVID and have a negative test. So they'll also have to
It's
see a
both.
provider
Yep.
to release them. And they can do that either in person or telemedicine.
Correct.
right?
Yeah.
One of the concerns that came up, somebody else?
Actually, Sam.
Yeah, Sam's had his hand up.
Oh, Sam, please.
He just has been bashful. You got to jump in there, Sam.
Please.
I just had a quick question about the self-certification slips. What is the significance of that besides, like, is there anything other than just the student's trust that we're basing that on? Is there like a parent signature involved or anything?
Yeah,
Because
your
I know
parents are,
that-
yeah, Sam, your parents are supposed to initial that
Okay.
before you come to school. But yes, it is built on trust, right? And more than anything, what it's attempting to do is to get people in the habit of monitoring their symptoms, so that if something changes, they've been doing a self-check every day, and they're, wait a second, something's different today, maybe I shouldn't go into school, right? Theoretically, the safety measures are built assuming that somebody may have COVID and be in school, right? Because we have people that are asymptomatic, that aren't displaying symptoms yet,
Right.
that might not display symptoms at all. So that's why all of the safety measures of the 6 feet of social distancing, the masks, the shields, the hand hygiene, all of those things, the disinfecting of the schools, the air exchange, all of those things are in place, assuming that somebody in school has COVID. Mike, your question?
Yeah, so I was going to ask, parents, some parents concerned about how we were handling contact tracing and also transparency in how we're going to be communicating to our parents and our students, if they've come in contact with somebody. So just a refresh on that for the.
Yeah, so we follow all of the guidance and procedures outlined by the DuPage County Health Department. And really, if somebody in your space, your building, your club, your activity, whatever, ends up with COVID, you'll receive one of two types of contacts. The one that most people will get and should get if everybody's following our safety procedures and protocols, both at school and at home, would be a low-risk letter, which means somebody in your space at some point has been diagnosed positively with COVID. However, we believe that you were following all the safety protocols were followed, and as a result, you are not at a high risk of having COVID. However, double down on your symptom checking and make sure you're keeping track just in case something got through, right? The opposite would be somebody you know was diagnosed with COVID and you were declared a close contact. So after talking to that person, we're like, hey, were you ever in 6 feet of somebody for 15 minutes or more? That shouldn't be happening within the programs we've built at school, right? And they're like, well, yeah, we hung out before school, or, we sat next to each other on the bus even though we weren't supposed to, and okay, so you were within 6 feet of somebody for 15 or more minutes. That other person is now a close contact, and they would get a close contact phone call. So somebody who is at risk, at that higher risk, is deemed as a close contact. We have a whole protocol for reaching out to them and making a personal contact so that they know all the process procedures, things that they should watch out for. There's a whole communication protocol that comes from the DuPage County Health Department. So when people first get that low-risk letter, they're going to completely freak out, and they probably shouldn't. You should assume if you're out in the world, life is low risk right now if you're following all of the safety protocols. And if for some reason we believe that you're at a greater risk, you'll get a personal contact from us and we'll walk through that with you.
So the tracking we're doing, though, is only the tracing, contact tracing. If a student comes down with COVID, we will do contact tracing for their activities related to school. We don't do it for their activities overall for the past 10 days.
We actually partner with the DuPage County Health Department and work through that whole process. So,
Because as we're seeing, there's lots of people, lots of kids out with groups without masks. So I'd be much more comfortable if the contact tracing would be all-encompassing and not just during their school.
yes, it is. Yeah, and we do that, like I said, with the DuPage County Health Department. There's a whole process for that. But if people don't want to end up in isolation and quarantine, they should wear their masks, keep 6 feet of social distancing, do all of the things that we're doing at school, they should do when they're not at school, because then there's two things that happen. Greater chance that you get COVID, which is the worst-case scenario, and the next worst-case scenario is you're identified as a close contact and you have to isolate or quarantine and worry about it for that next 10 to 14 days.
Well, and I would also just, so everybody is aware, if you are a family member of if you live with a close contact, family member, friend, whatever, if you live with a close contact, very few of us, we have our families, we live with our families. If you're living with a close contact, that may actually impact whether or not you can be, if you're living with somebody who shows signs of COVID or who is a close contact and has been told to isolate or test, it may very well impact whether or not you'll be allowed into your workplace. So it really does go beyond our students. So you really should encourage your kids to socially distance and wear masks. I know we send people home all the time who are close contact relatives for 14 days.
It's the same thing here. If you're
it's gonna be the
close contact of a relative.
We're talking a lot about COVID, contracting it, but the flu season's coming upon us.
Oh, yeah.
And, heaven forbid this would happen, but if teachers get COVID or the flu, who's going to be teaching those classes?
Yeah, so it'll work very similar to how it does now. There'd be a sub for the in-person portion. Having 2 classes a day helps us meet the safety guidelines, but it also does help us in subbing, right? It's a lot easier to find subs for 2 classes than 4. Even though it's the same amount of time, it's just the complexity of folding everything together, right? So we do have our normal pool of subs. We also have in our contract that we signed with the DGA last year, the ability for every teacher to be assigned 2 periods of subbing throughout the year. So that's an additional pool of subbing resources that we have. And then, you know, we'll work through those 2 things. But we believe, we're confident we have enough subs available at the beginning here to get us started. Now, there is a chance, obviously, that if all of a sudden cases take off and they grow, or we spike amongst the staff, that we could end up where we can't continue in-person learning, or if a lot of people end up with long isolation periods or quarantine periods because they're not practicing all of these things away from school, then yeah, we could end up in a situation where we can't staff the building and we have to go fully remote for a period of time. An example of this is I have a colleague that staff member had a wedding over a weekend. People attended, didn't social distance, didn't wear masks, they just attended the wedding, and then somebody was positive at that wedding, and nearly the entire staff in a building had to then isolate or quarantine for 14 days. So they had to move to fully remote learning for 14 days while everybody quarantined. So that's why we keep saying it's important that everybody follows these procedures all the time, so that we don't end up in a period of time where we lose large groups of students or large groups of staff members because they could have potentially come in close contact with somebody.
I have another just real quick question on related services. How are those being, some kids have those mandated minutes. How are you delivering those services?
Yeah, we're working through each individual family and their IEP plan and how that would work with their IEP team, and put together remote learning plans for students that way.
Okay.
So, you know, it's very, obviously as an IEP is, it's very different from student to student, but the IEP teams have worked through that.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Seeing none, again, thank you to you and all of the staff, because again, this represents many nights and weekends and hours and hours and hours of work, and I have to commend you because I think, you know, when we last voted for the hybrid plan, it was with the understanding that if it was not a safe situation based on what IDPH ultimately came up with, we would not go forward. And to your credit and everybody on your team's credit, we did not go forward. And now we have something that is more in line with what IDPH is sanctioning. And I, for one, I'm sure I speak for everybody, I hope I speak for everybody, appreciate the work of everybody who's done that.
Oh.
Well, and I will continue to say, if we would have had these guidelines, and I know it's a novel virus and everything's changing,
Yeah.
but I will continue to stand on that soapbox and tell you, had we had the information that we have now in June, we'd already be back.
I understand that. I understand that.
And I know people say I'm pointing fingers, but it's the fact of the situation.
Yeah, but we've lived through this, I mean, if you're old enough, you've lived through this with the AIDS epidemic, we've seen it with SARS, we've seen it with H1N1. It's evolving, it changes, and these people, IDPH, see, they're all running as fast as they can, just as we are, so it is what it is. But I agree, I understand. Okay, hearing no other comments, we're going to move on to the 2021 concussion oversight team.
Oh, I skipped that one in my slides. So this is up for approval in the consent agenda this evening. This comes to the board every year at the start of the school year. We're 1 month behind just because of everything else that was going on. But we do have a concussion oversight team. According to board policy, the board has to approve that every year. It's, you know, the same type of roles that have been there in the past several years as we've done this.
And those names are in everybody's
Those names are in the board packet, yes.
board packet. Any questions on concussions? No. Grant allocations, 2021?
All right. This is one that also just is an information item for the board that comes every year. as to the total amount of allocations we're receiving through all of the different federal grants. So these are available for your review in here. Gina is the one that puts together this information for you every year. There's rarely questions on this. It's more of just an information item. But if you do have questions, you approve them tonight saying that you've seen them, and that's kind of what you're doing, since these are all determined at the federal level anyway.
But it is a substantial.
It is a
for,
substantial amount of money,
For
yes.
our district, so thank you. Any questions or thoughts? Hearing none, board policies 2.260 revised and 2.265 new.
Boy, I'm out of order here. There we go. Did we skip that one, or am I out of order? Do we have the teacher administrative benefit report?
That's later.
That's later? Oh, well, I can't order slides, obviously.
But the board had an opportunity to review. Did anybody, I know I had a little question.
So here are the two policies that are there. So Title IX changed over this summer. Next month, we're going to come back and share what some of those changes are and everything. We've just been really focused with the board on return to in-person learning. But what used to happen was in 2.260 sat all of the grievance policies, including Title IX. As a result of the changes in legislation and the recommendations of our legal team, we have added 2.265, which pulls out Title IX grievance procedures and sets it aside. So somebody could have a uniform grievance claim. They could also have a Title IX claim. They aren't absolutely mutually exclusive. We're asking the board to take the unusual action tonight to just waive the first reading and just adopt these policies. It's at the recommendation of our legal team that we do so. It's all written by our attorneys. You know, the administration has had no oversight over these policies. And they recommend, because this law already is in place, that we just adopt these immediately. The administration's been trained on all these procedures. Between all of the other work we've done, Gina herself has sat through more than 12 or 15 hours of training on this herself, so that we are in compliance for all of the training that goes along with this. Every administrator in the district has received multiple rounds of training on this over the last 2 months. And next month, we'll come and tell you what that was all about.
Very good.
Any questions or? Okay, the 2021 school calendar?
Parent-teacher conferences.
All right, this is, any change that we make in the calendar needs to come before the board. One of the things we did was, because that week of the non-attendance day on Monday that we've talked about, that October 12th week was already messed up, we decided to just mess up the whole week and move parent-teacher conferences off of the following week and back to the week before. Information on scheduling those and how they work, I mean, they'll all be remotely, and how that all happens will be coming. But essentially, the important part tonight is that the board approves that amended calendar that reflects that.
It keeps us on our 2 weeks in and 1 week.
Right, keeps that, the rotation fits inside of there.
Any questions? Hearing none, the next administrator teacher salary and benefits.
I already skipped past that slide, but every year that gets updated on the website, and we are required to inform the board at a public meeting that we updated it on our website, and we did.
Good.
Did you have a question, Zoe? Okay. Any questions? The ASC condensing unit?
This is the part of the air conditioning unit, major part of the air conditioning unit at the Administrative Service Center. Yeah, this is like what does the majority of the work. It is a 28-year-old piece of equipment that Jim is holding together MacGyver style with duct tape and paper clips. Not literally, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And it has more than reached the end of its life. So Jim went out for bids on this and is recommending that the board accept tonight under action the lowest acceptable bid, and we get this work done.
Questions?
Nope.
Master facility plan progress.
All right, this is last week I brought you update on actual progress. This week I'm bringing you an update on the budget. This is the monthly budget report on the master facility plan. The key variables that we look at is we're still hitting our GMAX contract values, so the amount that we told the public that this was going to cost is still the number that we're inside of, that $122,135,830. Inside of that, we have nearly bid out everything. That's where you can see unlet. We're down to about $1.3 million worth of items to bid out over the next year. So what that tells you is we're getting really close to what the absolute price is on this. You could see the contingency adjusted a little bit off of work that was completed over the last month, but we're still very healthy at $3.258 million. If you remember, the construction group was asking for us to make sure that there was $1 million in there for the final summer of work. So we're well above that. Owner budget costs continue to increase, which is due to things mostly related to found asbestos or lead paint and removing that. So as the board is already well aware, we have removed far more of those two substances from our building than we ever expected to, but it's good that those things are gone. You can see the contingency up there, remaining FF&E allowance, that is furniture, fixtures, and equipment. There will be a lot of that next year because both commons come online next summer. That is a lot of furniture and equipment. So you can see we have a little over half of that allowance remaining for that last part of the project. Now inside of that, we've got a lot of the STEAM stuff done at both sides of town in phase A and B, right? The science, technology, engineering, and math. If you walk up past these classrooms at the end of the night, you'll see a lot of that displayed. And then the last bit of allowances that could become contingency if they're not used. Phase A, $110,000 sitting there, and that's about ready to come back because we're almost done with sprinklers and fire alarms. Phase B was the work that was completed this summer, so allowances remaining after this summer's work are $194,000. So after we get through all of the final bills and punch lists and hours, that is the amount that could come back to us. It should be close to that when we're done. And then you can see phase C is a large amount of allowances out because the majority of that work has not begun yet. So we have another $1.305 million in allowances that if not spent, now remember, we're anticipating we'll need to spend all of that, right? But any amount of that is not spent would also come back to the contingency at the end of the summer next year. Site improvements, we have about $105,000 left in site improvements, and those are wrapping up as well. So we sit pretty healthy so far as contingency and allowances sit. We're ahead of budget, or better than expected with our budget.
So Hank, not directly related to the budget, but made me think of it. By October 19th, when the new hybrid schedule kicks in, will the new science labs and that whole new extension at North be ready?
Yeah, the Southeast STEAM edition, it's going to be really close to that time. Now, that's not holding us back. That's not influencing we're fully prepared to open school with that work going on. It should be right around, wow, making sure you're all awake. It should be right around that time that it's finishing up. So it'll be right as they're coming back for that or just after they come back. But it's in that window. It depends on how the next couple of weeks go. You saw it a few weeks ago, and it was really steel at that point. Mike saw it on Friday, and all the walls are up, so, they move really fast.
Going along.
In that work, once they move inside, it's crazy how fast they move.
Do we have work out to bid right now?
Yeah, some of that last dollar amount, which is really casework for Phase C.
Because there's been a considerable increase in costs, material costs this year, thanks to COVID.
Correct.
And lumber right now is about 60% higher than it was in January. Wow. I mean, how are we faring with dealing with those increased costs and supply chain issues.
Well, the majority of our stuff was bid out before
Right.
we hit the, the real effects of COVID.
Well, I asked
Yeah.
if we had things out to bid right now.
But the stuff that's out to bid is, 1.3 million in the, is what's left, So in the whole scope of the entire project, that's a very small, it's less than 1%. So we're not concerned about that.
Okay.
It's from, I'm sure the folks bidding on that are a lot of the same folks that have been bidding on casework throughout the entire project. It's not raised any red flags amongst the team.
I'm glad we have a lot of contingency, just in case, so.
Yeah, it was a lot of tripping over one another, or not tripping over. That was the problem this summer, is we couldn't trip over one another. We had to stagger all the deliveries and arrivals, and that made it a far more complex summer.
Yeah, that's another point too, to put to bed the myth that somehow, that we haven't had schools open so that we could get more work done. That's not the case, and as well, we really haven't been able to accelerate much because of these issues of keeping people apart and.
Well, we would have been able to open in that first week of school exactly the way that we anticipated,
Right.
Before the summer began. The projects that are still going on, like the Dunham Street Circle here, the STEAM addition at North, are all projects that we knew would extend into the start of the school year.
Right, but the fact that the schools have been closed hasn't assisted us greatly in accelerating the process of the construction.
No, it helped us early,
Right.
like in the spring.
Right.
It allowed us to get footings in the ground earlier and those kinds of things that we wouldn't have been able to do if students were on campus.
Yes.
But then the complexity of having to maintain social distancing and separation over the course of the summer slowed us down. So at the end, we kind of just ended up where we
Right.
thought we would be.
Right, I know this, you know this, I want to make sure everyone else
Yeah.
knows too, so.
Anything else on facility? Have we had any freedom of information?
Yes, we have, and they're available on our website. That's how you can get to those.
5-year financial projections.
All right. Mark's going to take most of this. Just a reminder for the board, the reason for the 5-year financial projection is that it really provides the best view of the financial stability long range as far out as we could reasonably be expected to project. This is your starting point for next year's budget in the cycle. And this is the first opportunity for the next year for the board to direct me and then ultimately the administration that our priorities are wrong in some way and are not matching with the mission and vision of the district or the board's expectations. Things that Mark will talk about today, 3 things that run through this presentation are obviously financial challenges due to the pandemic. Remember, we ran a deficit, a slight deficit at the end of the last school year, mostly related to non-collected fees. The need for working cash bonds because of that deficit that occurred last year and a projected deficit this year. And then how long-term we're bolstered by expiring TIFs. So that's your preview, and I will turn it over to Mark to talk about more of the specifics.
Okay, so the pandemic had its effect on our budget pretty heavily last quarter of last year. And as Hank had mentioned, it put us into a negative spot. And it wasn't just the waiver of fees, actually, it was just one of the items. Interest rates, and anything that was tied to the economy dropped and came in lower than we expected in last year, and really we're planning for that going forward. So I'm going to start with a 5-year projection, and there's a rather lengthy memo that goes along with this in the board packet, and I encourage you to read that for the full details. I'm just going to hit the highlights. But I'm going to start with the 5-year projection, and that will discuss a working cash bond issuance. We had a hearing for that a few months ago, and we are proposing that, and I'll get into some detail for that, and then roll it into the budget for the next year that we'd be asking you to approve tonight. The if you go to the first one there, you see this in your board packet as a much longer sheet. This is just the top section of it, and
It's also in front of you, board members, you have it.
yeah, you should have the full sheet in front of you. The key thing here is that really the new construction value that we've had historically has been pretty low. Really, since the recession, we haven't had any great spurts in that area. But we do expect, at least I expect it with this pandemic and then with the economy right now, that it won't be as high as it's been on average. And at least starting out for the first year, the forecast to have a 0.7% CPI, new construction value for projecting our tax revenues, which are highly dependent upon the CPI and the new construction together. The EAV change really doesn't have a big impact on our revenue source. It changes our tax rate. That's all because the property tax caps have actually unhinged our tax extension and assessed values as one of the problems, I would say, with the tax caps, just one of them. There's really not too many key things on this sheet, but it's just to let you know what assumptions were in place, so that if we were to change those around, it would have an impact on it. Anything with the gray shade with white lettering is going to have a high impact because it's going to have a direct impact on the forecast and more immediately. So second middle section here are the key variables. The top line, the projected enrollment. We use an outside estimation by John Casarda, who does our enrollment projections. He does it for almost all the schools in DuPage County, and he's nationally as well. You can see that for 2021, our current year, it's actually up a little bit. That affected our FTE count and things like that, because if you look below that, we try and keep a consistent program, which using this new metric that we started with last year is the average class size, but also a couple of rows down, the FTE ratio of 12.2. That's not just certified teachers, but it's all certified support staff as well. And we try to maintain the program in terms of the consistent experience for students. Of course, this is a very strange year. But going forward, we assume we're going to keep the same quality programming in place. Gray areas with the white font here again are, if we were to change that FTE ratio, the ratio of certified staff to students, or below that, the capital outlay for the annual capital outlay for projects. And with the master facility plan kind of culminating next summer, we've allowed that to drop down by a couple $100,000, but typically we try and keep that at $1.2 million throughout the forecast. And one adjustment that I made to this, typically I use a 5-year average for the consumer price index for property taxes, but if you look at the lowest row there, right now we've been watching it, I track it every month, and it kind of implies that we could be down as low as 1%, so I'm using that as the estimation for the impact on property taxes for the 22-22 fiscal year. If we go now to the next page, there's some tips that are really important and have a big impact on us. We have a fourth tip, which is not even coming due yet, won't end until the 2029-2030 fiscal year. So it's not really in the picture here. But the Woodridge James Avenue TIF is a protected area in terms of its evaluation. Districts aren't really able. It's an area that is possibly blighted or has a lack of growth in areas. So it'd be like an area where the buildings are vacant, possibly. And James Avenue was a TIF in Woodridge where what happens, it's a tax increment financing situation where they freeze the value of the taxes to us in terms of assessed valuation, access to those, to make taxes on it. And then they still pay taxes, but it's kept by the village instead of coming to the school district. And they make improvements in that area over a period of time. And it can last as long as 23, 24 years. And so these are really long-term plans when they do it. And so we have one that in Woodridge that ended at the end of 2019. The new construction value that accrued for the last 23 years will now be released back to us. Instead of paying taxes and it being held by the municipality, it'll come to us. And so it's a boost in our assessed valuation, our levy and our extensions for taxes. But we won't see that until the next fiscal year to us, which is the calendar year 2021. We won't see it until the 21-22 fiscal year because we defer our early taxes. So I want to just lay this out so you can see the lag that develops between when the TIF expires, new construction hits the tax rolls the next year, and then the following year is when we actually see it in our budget. And so the Downers Grove downtown tax TIF expires at the end of this calendar year, December 31st. New construction will be added in 2021, and then the taxes we'll see would be the two collections or the series of collections we have in our calendar year 2022. And then the last one is an Ogden Avenue TIF, which is a large TIF, goes along Ogden by the Downers Grove Village. It expires in 2024, so that's the only activity during this 5-year period that we'll really see. We won't see that until 2026 calendar years ended in our fiscal year 26, 27. So I wanted you just to see the picture because these are really rare. We only have one other TIF, and that's in Oak Brook. Again, and that won't expire until 2029. But from a financial impact, if you go back up to the Woodridge, there's two things that we'll see that will help our 5-year forecast. There's a $430,000 balance that's our portion of the ending fund balance. So there were TIF funds that were pushed into it by the village or collected by the village, but they didn't spend it all by the time that they're expiring. And so our relative share of that, along with all the other taxing bodies, is $430,000. It's a one-time hit, but you'll see it in our financial forecast. And then the annual increase that we'll experience from the property tax evaluation increases coming back to us will give us about a $96,000 a year boost in our tax extension. If you look at the middle one, this is really the big one that we've known about and have been watching and working with the village on, and that's the downtown TIF. They issued bonds to do all the work in the TIF. They don't have a pot of money. The money that comes into the TIF is used for to pay off those bonds and principal and interest, and it has and typically does exceed the cost of the bonds. Principal and interest exceeds the amount that's been collected, so the village has had to cover that difference. So there's really no fund balance that's available there like there was with the Woodridge TIF. But the impact to our assessed valuation is going to be really large, 1.2% increase. It'll generate about $1 million a year in additional revenue for the district. So these are things that we've been watching. When we do a 5-year, we know that this has been in the future, where it gives us a safety net. And the fact that you'll hear me use that term several times, there's several different safety nets that we have that are coming into play here. For the next one, that's the bottom section of the long form. That's projected financial data. And again, the area in gray with the white is the key stuff that's unusual. But if you look for the second column, fiscal year 2021, our revenues, we expect to go up 1.6%. That might be a little optimistic, but we're hoping they do still grow. Primarily property taxes, but we have, if you noticed on the schedule that showed all the different federal programs and titles that we're in, You notice it's been dropping every year, and so is some of the state money. That we're concerned, very concerned about the state of economy in Illinois and their ability to maintain the level of support that they've been giving us. And so we have very high concerns about that. But so the budget that we have gives us about 1.6% revenues for this year for the 2021 budget. Expenditures of $95.2 million, and excess of revenues actually of $377,000. The next line down is called transfers to other funds. And this is something we started, I think it was in 2004, 2005. We started doing projects out of our operating funds instead of issuing bonds to do it. We would issue debt certificates, which are payable out of an operating fund, and then we would not have to increase our tax to taxpayers. But knowing that this cost to pay those bonds would end someday, knew that at some point we would have excess room in our operating funds as kind of a safety net into the future. And we've done some serious things with this. We purchased land under this mechanism next to the North Campus. All the expansion of the North Campus was done through debt certificates and paying it out of the educational and other operating funds instead of issuing bonds and having taxable bonds to our taxpayers. The Norfolk extension to continue Norfolk across from Dunham to Springside was done with that kind of funding, and also some other large projects inside the buildings we've done the same way. Knowing that someday that would kind of go down. And if you look at the transfers, you can see that it does drop drastically in 22-23. It's going to go from $3.8 million of money coming out of the operating funds to pay for some construction and other things, down to 663. And that 600 is largely stuff that we do put off. That's where our Chromebook costs and other things that we use some small leasing projects for that. And so that's a big positive for our 5-year forecast. So it tells us, even if you look at our change in operating fund balance, and that's what I usually point to the board, look at the change in operating fund balance, that tells us where we are. We lost about $1 million last year. Kind of unusual. We usually don't have losses like that, but all of our local revenues, interest, some of it was a waiver of fees, corporate personal property replacement tax, which is something it's based on the economy in terms of taxpayers, corporate taxpayers paying money that comes to us. Well, if they earn less money, a lot of shops are closed, a lot of businesses are closed, there's going to be less corporate personal property replacement tax available. So we have 2 years after this year, 2021, we're going to lose, we project 2.3 million, and in 21-22 at 3 million, which if we don't do anything would leave us with a negative fund balance. You can see where we would be. So what in the current year of 2021, you'll see in the gray box a $10 million bond issuance, and that's been recommended to the Board of Education to issue working cash bonds so that we could bolster our reserves and have dollars available for the next couple of years when we really don't know exactly. I mean, we're guessing at these lost numbers. The state of Illinois is our biggest concern, at least mine, in that there's a lot of push for a progressive tax rate, and if that's not passed, there's discussion that all state budgets would have to start, getting cut. So we really don't know exactly where some things are going to go with, especially at the national level. Certainly the presidential election is an unknown that could have an impact on the economy as well. So this is where it leaves us. Actually, it puts us in good condition. We've always maintained a relatively low fund balance. Things have been predictable enough that we've been able to survive that way. Districts around us have up to 50, 60% reserves, which my philosophy has always been, it's kind of like how corporations work. It's the shareholders would rather have the money in their pocket than sitting in the corporation's pocket. And if we can get by with a low reserve level, I'd like to do that. But I think we're going into some kind of unknown territory, and I'm recommending a little bit higher balance. 10% is still very prudent, and that's where we would end up probably by the end of this 5-year forecast if all this pans out the same way. It's very lean compared to, if you look at surrounding districts and other schools. So that's really the key things about the forecast. So the next action is an action item.
Any questions here, Mark?
Yeah, you want to?
Yeah, can you go back to that slide?
Sure.
So in your, the transfer to other funds, we talked about the 2.7 and the 3.8 the next 2 years. If you look at the excess revenue for this year at 377, there's still a lot of unknowns for this year, we've been talking about tonight. Is there any piece of that 2.7 that could be delayed or pushed into future years, like 22, 23, or 23, 24, when we look like we're in a better situation? Because, I mean, these numbers look good because of the bonds, which we're going to talk about now, but if that 377 goes negative on us, which it really could because of what's going on, I don't know, do we want to have more flexibility? Can those be pushed out?
Could you tell me where the 2.7, which one you're?
The 377 on the excess revenue.
Oh, okay, right.
And then, so I'm just wondering if that 2.7, the 2.73 transfers to other funds and the 3.837 in 2020 and 2021, do we have flexibility to push that out to future years where it looks like we're in a little bit better financial shape?
We can. It would be a refinancing at this point, you know, and trying to stretch it out. It'd be refinancing, those are debt certificates. We can, but we think the safest solution is to actually let them just mature on their own. And even with the 10 million in bonds, I've talked to you several times about that, and the economy is getting very jumpy right now, and even a lot of a couple banks aren't going to bid on it, and they've already told us that they aren't going to bid because they don't know what's going on with the state of Illinois, and they think that that's going to directly impact us. And so it may not be a great time just to refinance those. I mean, we could, but I was really thinking it would be better to leave that off, go ahead and issue the bonds that we talked about and calculated, and then go that way. Yeah, it's just stretching it out and paying more in interest over the long term. But,
There's just
yeah,
seems to be a lot of uncertainty with what could happen.
next year, if things get really terrible again, that might be a solution to free up that, somehow stretch it out over 3 or 4 years or something.
Okay.
Any other questions? Again, there's, I think a fairly thorough write-up on that whole 5 years, so in the board packet, so please refer to that memo for more details.
If you walk away from here and have questions at all, reach out to me, and Mark and I will get
Sure.
answers to you.
So the next item that I have to present is the working cash bond resolution, and we're, again, preparing to issue $10.3 million working cash fund bonds. The purpose of these funds would be to support the district's operating funds reserves, which have fallen below 3% due to changes in the economy caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. We just broke through it to 2.6 last year, and I believe the year prior to that we were right on the 2.9 level as well. Working cash bonds, if you don't know, they're issued for working cash fund purposes to enable the district to have in its treasury at all times sufficient money to meet the demands for expenditures or corporate purposes. The proceeds of the working cash fund bonds will be deposited into the working cash fund at closing and will be available for interfund loans. Accordingly, they are not able to be issued as exempt from federal taxes. If you issue bonds for money you're going to hold on to, you can't issue them as non-taxable or tax exempt. Bonds that we use for our master facility plan, where we know we're going to spend them on a schedule, those were able to be issued on a tax exempt basis, but the market is so tight right now that it's not that much of a spread between taxable and non-taxable bonds, so it's still worth it to go to the market now. This resolution is a parameters resolution. It's because there's specific parameters that are listed in it that and give the board president and myself together to agree on whether the parameters are met, and that we would have the authorization to sign enclose the documents for the bonds. Bonds, the documents needed for the bonds. The key parameters are $10.3 million maximum bond issuance, maximum annual principal of $2.5 million for the bonds to be spread out, to not extend the annual debt service beyond 2028, to sell the bonds no later than March 21st of 2021, gives us quite a window. If we have a bad market, we can just wait for a while. And it says a maximum interest rate of 5%. That's standard if we go to a different type of sale, but we expect interest rates to be below 2% on this one, but the bond council always puts 5% in there for us. And I mentioned that the parameters resolution further authorizes the board president and me to approve the final sale of the bonds as long as the parameters within this resolution are being met. We're going to use a competitive bid process, which is we have contacted and sent out term sheets to banks that have bought bonds in the past and support schools. There's other mechanisms, those township treasurers in different counties in Cook County that buy school bonds and are very competitive. And so we will have they all turn them in, they're all closed bids, they turn them into our underwriters, and then we review them for making sure they meet the parameters, and we would take obviously the lowest cost issuing. Let's see, is there anything else up there that I should make sure I cover in terms of the years? The thing that kind of goes into the next piece is the debt service extension base. And I think, anyway, I got that piece. I wanted you to see it graphically because I've talked about it before, of how a debt service extension base works. You see the blue line that's towards the bottom going all the way across? When the tax caps came out, there was a realization that schools still had to do life safety work and would need working cash bonds. And there's a third item, which is, I think, tort judgment bonds, which is if you had some kind of a judgment against the district, you could issue bonds for that to help pay off that cost. But they realized that we needed a mechanism, and so they allowed, for a while, it was just whatever that dollar amount was when they did the tax caps, whatever, I think it was $2.2 million for us at that time. You could issue bonds for $2.2 million per year in terms of debt payment. So you couldn't cross that line, but you could levy up to it and issue bonds up to that. And so if you look in the far left, right now it's about 2.5 million now, and we assume the same amount going across. It actually can increase by CPI, but we, for this purpose, haven't increased it for this calculation of the cost of the bonds. So the first two columns are already filled with life safety bonds from the past. The third orange line that has a little teeny bit of light orange in there, that's going to be part of this bond issuance. And so we're going to fill in, going forward up for 7 years, the debt service extension base. We're going to use it. And quite honestly, because life safety is a cyclical thing every 10 years, typically this is a base that's always going to be in our taxes. I mean, it can drop and over time, but it typically isn't because, as soon as you're done doing the work for life safety, new rules come out, and you have to sprinkle areas that you didn't have to sprinkle before, different life safety things are in place. I'm amazed at how they can always find new things. But, so that's what we'd be doing. We'd be filling in the orange, keeping it to that same tax level. So a taxpayer won't see a drop that they might have seen if we didn't do this. Starting with the 2021 school year by a little bit. The average across of those is going to be about $30. It's on the average taxpayer for a $300,000 home. I think I miscalculated it before when I said $12. So it's closer to $30 on average. I think they're paying right now with our first year is about $48. So that's the highest annual impact when we pick up the full orange bars. But over the life of this, it's about $30 a year per $300,000. And that's an important fact that we have to understand that. we are very careful with our tax rate. We still have maintained, I checked with all the other high schools in DuPage County, we have the second lowest in the county for tax rate, a total operating tax rate. And that's an important part, and I try to be a good steward of that. And that's why we'd like to just spread this out, not let it increase, and try and have at least try and minimize the impact to taxpayers as much as possible.
So just to be clear, it's taxes that could potentially drop in the future that we are leaving at their current amount and not dropping to withstand the impacts of the pandemic here. And, I mean, people will see their same property tax bill as a result of it and not less. It is likely, though, due to this being used for other things like life safety projects and capital improvements and things related to that, that we would have continued to do that kind of work in this space in the future anyway. This is that emergency fund for when emergency projects develop. That's what it was put there for by the state of Illinois, and that's what we're proposing to continue to use it for.
All right. The next item is a budget hearing, and I'll do a quick presentation, and then you could maybe open it for a hearing. So the first slide there is a revenue. There we go. This is the revenue that's we've put it out at the August 17th board meeting and had the board approve it to be issued as a tentative budget. It's been on display for more than 30 days, so we're now at the point of being able to approve it and have it be our formal budget for the 2021 fiscal year. I highlighted the bond proceeds in there. That's something that very obviously changes that exhibit by issuing $10 million in bond proceeds. It would really be shown as another financial source, but in the final formal documents. But I put it in there so you can see it does have a big impact on our combined revenue percent change. It's up at 12.2%. Well, that's why, because it has a $10 million bond in it. Without that, it's about a 1.5% increase. And if you look at the replacement taxes, that's the second line down under the fiscal year 2021, the orange topping. There's property taxes, 2.1, and this is one of the reasons states like Illinois use property taxes, because they are not going to wither away and go down when a recession or pandemic or something like this hits and changes the assessed values. It helps the programs be better and consistent, more consistent. Replacement taxes, all the local things that have impact based on the economy are dropping. Replacement taxes, 17%, and that's a hard number that we got from the Department of Revenue. That's not an estimate. Interest income is going to drop some more. It's dropped. You look at on the right-hand side where fiscal year last year it's starting to drop. But we typically earn more than $1 million a year in interest income, and now we're down to $342,000. Food services, we do expect an increase in waivers because of what's happened in the economy with unemployment. It's just something that we expect. So we're expecting to lose money with food service just in terms of when the program itself isn't even running right now, so that's part of the problem. We typically do, based on just the state support and the meal prices, which are very low meal prices actually, cover our costs of the food and helps us cover some costs of just custodial care and other kitchen and replacing equipment in the kitchen and things like that it takes to run the cafeteria. But we don't think it will be taking in that much at all this year, maybe half a year if we're lucky with if we can open the kitchen, let's say the second semester, and I doubt that that's going to happen. But when we started putting the budget together, that was our projection for it. Registration fees, again, that's going to be affected by waivers, and just other local revenues, which typically involves rental income and things like that, which have been disturbed right now too. We're not renting out our property to large groups. So Overall, the budget without the bond proceeds is about 1.5, 1.6% of an increase. And that's really almost totally attributable to taxes. The last two items, general and state aid, the state portion of that is largely a reimbursement of last year's transportation, which was up much higher because of an increase in tuition students. And the federal aid is that 340,000 of the federal increase of 353,000 is COVID-related reimbursements we expect to get, and we're applying for a grant with the IEMA Illinois Emergency Fund, so we can get some dollars and recover some of our costs for the PPE and other things like that related to the pandemic. So those aren't really, we would love to see those costs go away and that revenue reimbursement go away too. We'd like to be back to normal. So if we move on to expenditures, the FTE, the first item is salaries, and the FTE accounts for about 1.3% of that. We have some because of enrollment changes, but we also have things like the nurses that we're contracting are being paid out of that line item. So we have costs also related to the pandemic there, but without that, it's about a 1.7 increase for existing staff. About 90% of our salaries are tied to collective bargaining agreements, and so they go up and down with whatever CPI is for the most part, and so we're in the middle of a 5-year, or actually this first full year of a 5-year agreement with our teachers, and we'll be finishing one with our support staff, but we'll be working on a new one later this year. Benefits, 3.6% increase. Really typically, we budget 6%, but we're having a real good year right now. It's some of it, I think, is because of COVID, where people who would normally getting elective surgeries are not having it done. And so our plan hasn't paid out so much, but 3.6 is our estimated increase for that. And really nothing too exciting here. The capital outlay is down because we bought some activity buses last year, and again, we're trying to just tailor it down a little bit because of all the other construction going on in the area. So the bottom line is really what it does to this last exhibit, which is the fund balances. We just sort it all together for you, so there's a beginning. And I guess the line to look at is on the lower section, the tentative budget totals. We have about $408,000 in the operating funds, exclusive of the health benefit account. So the health trust is $1.8 million below that. So we have $2.2 million in the total operating funds for the district. But we keep the health benefit out because it's only used for that purpose. It's not like it could be used for anything else. And if we do issue the bond, and we hope that happens, you can see the last grouping right above that orange line is a working cash fund. We'll be establishing a working cash fund, which will now be part of the operating funds. So we'll be able to see where it is every year and every month when we report to you, but we can track it, where it's going. Tentative budget totals would be $8 million for the operating fund for the current year. And so you can see we need to dip into that $10 million bond right away because we'll be about $2 million short in the operating funds by the end of this year. That's the item. So now if you would like, you could, if you have any questions.
Any questions from the board
you can
before we
open.
do the public hearing and open it up to anybody who would like to comment on the budget?
Nope.
All right, at this
Did you
point,
give me?
No, we had all this ahead of time.
Okay.
we can move into the public hearing, Nancy.
So this is a public hearing on the 2020-2021 tentative budget. The tentative budget has been on display for 30 days as required by law. Now the administration brings the tentative budget forward to the board for final approval. This is the final opportunity for the public to provide feedback on the tentative budget before the board takes action later this evening. Does anybody want to address the board? Come on up to the...
Can I take my mask off?
No, sir, please
No.
leave it on.
Okay. Dear members of the Board of Education, my name is Scott O'Connell. I'm a member of the Downers Grove Watch. Unfortunately, our president, Tom Sleeter, is unavailable to be here tonight, so I will be representing the Watch for this hearing. Therefore, I'll also be providing testimony and asking questions of various witnesses. At this time, while I'm concluding this opening statement, I ask that the individual controlling the white screen here at the meeting and the screen available to those viewing the meeting remotely locate 2 PDF files. Additionally, I ask that members of the board take a moment to locate and open the same records on their laptop computers. I'll be referencing pages from the following 2 documents. The first record that should be made available to the audience is the PDF file containing the ISBE Excel budget form for fiscal year 2021 as found on the district's webpage. The PDF file is 21 pages. This record can be located by starting on the district's homepage with the top line menu item labeled Departments, then Business, then Financial Information, under the subheading Budget Information. The second record that should be opened at this time in anticipation of its eventual viewing is the record found within tonight's agenda at 7C, entitled Financial Pages. The PDF file is 24 pages, with the first page being the monthly treasurer's report signed by School Treasurer Eric Wagner. At this time, I wish to remind the elected members of the board that participation by members of the audience during a hearing such as this one is distinctly different from the public comment period that is required under the Open Meetings Act to be a part of every agenda of every meeting held by the public body. A hearing is not just another meeting held by the board in front of the community. A hearing allows relevant statements, both oral statements and written statements, to be made by members of the community to the board so that those statements can be considered before the full board takes final action on a critical matter. These statements are often referred to as testimony. In addition to testimony from the community, the structure of a hearing allows for questions to be asked by members of the audience of various witnesses in attendance. Additionally, the structure of a hearing allows, additionally, the structure of a hearing allows for questions to be asked by members of the board of various witnesses in attendance. It is critical that each individual board member understand that during a hearing, your position is modified to being at times a witness being asked a question by the audience. Administrators may also be called as witnesses and ask questions. Additionally, if there are any other individuals who are considered to be expert witnesses, those witnesses can be called forward for questioning. During a hearing, all witnesses, including the chair of this hearing, along with the other 6 members of the board, should consider each of their answers to be the equivalent to testimony given under oath, either answers given during a deposition or an open court. I would like to remind each witness that I call that your answers should be related to the question asked and that the answer be truthful to the best of your knowledge and belief. Finally, during the time that I have the floor, whether I am providing testimony or questioning any witness, I fully expect that the chair of the hearing will maintain decorum and will immediately address anyone attempting to interfere with the hearing by informing them that interruptions will not be tolerated.
Please go on, they're simply consulting on something.
I just wanted to wait till they were done talking so I could be heard. Additionally, under the Criminal Code of Illinois, if anyone interferes with a witness who is answering a question, that person can be arrested and charged with interfering with a public hearing. That warning is applicable to everyone, including board members, witnesses such as administrators, and members of the audience. That concludes my opening statement. Please consider the following to be my written testimony and questions on the proposed budget for fiscal year 2021. I will be providing of this written testimony and my drafted questions to the Secretary of the Board of Education in order for her to place both within the record of this hearing. As previously stated, my comments will directly reference various pages and cells found within the ISBE budget form 50-36 for fiscal year 2021. At this time, I ask that the PDF file containing the August Treasurer's Report and the other 23 pages be shown to the audience and be viewed by the board and administrators. Could you, is there?
No, we're not prepared to
can't do that?
provide that,
Okay.
nor were we asked that in advance, therefore we will not be
Okay.
presenting it. However, I can, if you send me an email requesting that, I can forward it to the Board of Education.
Okay, well, on on the August Treasurer's Report, my first question is directed to Board Member Drexler. Do you have the Treasurer's Report open?
No, I don't.
You don't? Okay. Now, on page,
Mr. O'Connell, there's no requirement that board members have any of these documentations that you're requesting open, available, or at their disposal at this time. You can claim that that's the case, but there is no requirement that they have access to these materials. They have been provided access to these materials in advance of tonight's board meeting.
well, let me tell you what's on the Treasurer's Report. This is page 2 of the check register, page F8 of the Treasurer's Report. If you have the ability to access this, you will be approving this in the consent agenda for later tonight. The third entry on page 8 begins with check number 223936. That line represents one of the bills that you and the board will be asked later this evening to approve. The title of the fund and that bill is life safety. On page 13, the 20th entry also is number 224.
Mr. O'Connell, can you raise your mask, please?
Thank you.
On page 13, I'm sorry, on page 13, the 20th entry is also titled from the fund, Life Safety, in the amount of $11,773. Now, these two entries record the fact that later this evening, the superintendent and the chief school business official will be asking that this board approve the expenditure of $41,548.35 out of the Life Safety Fund, a fund which has been labeled by the ISBE as the 90 Fund. Now, at the top of page 7 of 24, the third entry on page 7 is life safety, as I've said. I'm sorry, page 7 is the, earlier in the treasurer's report, where it's F7. It's showing the expenses, the accounts payable, check register, fund totals, and the title is Life Safety, $41,548.35. My next question is to,
Is that a question?
well, since you don't, nobody is going to open this up because you don't want to, the name of that fund is the Capital Projects Fund. Now, if a fund is labeled within this record as the Capital Projects Fund, a record presumed to be drafted by the administration and one that you are likely to sign under penalty of perjury, is it the actual Fire Prevention and Life Safety Fund of the district? Is anybody aware of what fund are you aware of what fund that those expenses are being approved from? I'm going to take that as a no. Okay, now it's for Controller Staling. One of your duties is to establish record keeping that properly accounts for the various funds of the district. As such, you keep a set of books, and the school treasurer, Eric Wagner, keeps a set of books. So, Witness Staling, are you the administrator that oversees on a monthly basis this production of this record?
Yes, I am.
Yes, you are. Witness Staling, is the fund labeled within this record as the Capital Projects Fund actually the Fire Prevention and Life Safety Fund of the district, and a fund that has been designated by the ISBE as the 90 Fund?
The Fire Prevention and Life Safety Fund is a capital projects fund, so we use that name, that title for it as well in the short messages on those reports.
So the answer to the question is yes.
If it says life safety coming from it, yes, I would say it's a capital project fund, life safety, yes.
Now, on the very first page of your statement of financial position, you list the funds, and there is an MFP capital projects fund, and there is a capital projects fund that has $316,000 in it. That is what you are claiming is the life safety fund?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, thank you.
Can I ask what this has to do with the budget itself?
Correct.
I mean,
This
budget
is
hearing-
supposed to be a public
Budget hearing.
hearing on the tentative budget.
I'm getting this.
So I'm assuming this will connect back to that soon?
You're not interrupting me, are you? You're asking a question?
Actually, yes, I'm trying to figure out if this is related to the matter of the hand of the Board of Education, which is a public hearing on the 2021 tentative budget, or if this is you grandstanding on some other matter. Because if it's not related to the public hearing on the 2021 tentative budget, the appropriate time to address the board would be at the end under public comment. You would be restricted to 3 minutes.
Now, I'd like you to look at the
Can you
budget.
clarify if we are talking about the 2021 tentative budget?
I'm about to go to the budget. So, on the budget that you're about to approve, let's start with page 2. The Fire Prevention and Safety Fund, at the beginning of this fiscal year, July 1st, 2020, shows it has zero money in it and zero expenses. That is in direct
That
conflict.
column from the ISB is, their comments are to us, are that's for tax levy. If we issued a tax levy for life safety, which we do not, we would use that account for that, not a capital project like that. So
Well,
it's in the capital
the-
project group.
By law, the proceeds from bonds for fire prevention and safety purposes are required to be placed in the 90 fund, which is the Fire Prevention and Safety Fund, and expenses are supposed to be accounted for life safety purposes from the Fire Prevention and Safety Fund. And if you said that on your treasurer's report that you're accounting for those out of a separate fund, that's in direct conflict with the budget.
No, we're not. The
From-
fund is used, the master facility plan is taking care of the referendum, and the capital projects fund for the fire prevention, life safety is in a separate fund.
Well, you may state it's in a separate fund, but it's not on your budget. And even tonight, you're approving expenditures from the FPS fund, the Fire Prevention and Safety Fund, which are not included in the budget you're about to approve.
No, they are. They're in the
So,
capital
well,
project fund.
I'm just believing my eyes that,
Can you allow him to answer? I'd like to hear Mr. Stalen's.
I'm sorry, I can't understand the thing you're saying.
I'd like to hear Mr. Stalen's answer. Mr. Stalen, what were you going to say?
No, there's capital projects funds, and there are separate ones. We use a 60-type fund for that. There's a 61, 62, 63, different capital project funds. The life safety is one of those. They only give one column for all of our capital project funds that we use, and that's
Once again,
and that's
the ISBE requires those to be kept separate.
We'll call them and ask
FPS
them-
funds,
ask them to look
may
at it.
I finish, please?
Sure.
The ISBE, the school code requires money acquired for FPS purposes to be accounted for separately in an FPS fund.
It is.
And on the budget, it's not included.
No,
So-
it is included in the capital project group.
Well, it's not in the fund where it is required by the ISBE to be
Our
placed.
auditors don't have a problem with it, and in the
So
20 years
you
of
have,
planning has
so
never happened.
you have combined the life safety fund in the capital projects fund for accounting purposes. Thank you, that was one of my questions.
In the capital
Okay.
project group of funds.
Group of funds.
It's one of
So-
the funds.
Section 17-211S states the following: when any taxes levied or bonds issued for FPS, for fire prevention, safety, energy conservation, and school security purposes, such proceeds shall be deposited and accounted for separately within the Fire Prevention and Safety Fund. I will repeat the key phrase: such proceeds shall be deposited and accounted for separately within the Fire Prevention and Safety Fund. That's the 90 fund and not the 60 fund. Based upon the evidence presented this evening, it's clear that this tentative budget must be rejected by this board due to the fact that Controller Stalen has not presented the accounts of the various district funds in accordance with the school code. Additionally, the Downers Grove Watch urges each member of this board to review the last 6 budgets prepared by Controller Stalen and approved by various boards. You will find a pattern and practice of seated boards accepting at face value the work product of Controller Stalen as it relates to the Life Safety Fund. The tentative budget misrepresents, deliberately we believe, the district's finances. It is the opinion of the Downers Grove Watch that Controller Stalen's actions are intentional and not an accident or a simple oversight. The life safety section of the school code is clear and unambiguous, and yet both the school treasurer and the school controller have established a set of books that are not in compliance with the law. Therefore, this budget must be rejected and this hearing must be suspended by proper motion until such time when it can be reconvened on or before September 30th. During the interim, the superintendent must take responsibility for the production of a tentative budget that's drafted in compliance with the law. During the interim, the chair must take responsibility for the availability of the school treasurer, Eric Wagner, to answer questions as a critical witness to the financial condition of the district. That concludes my written statement on the Life Safety Fund and its absence within the tentative budget. Now I'd like to move on to a second issue the Watch believes must be reviewed at this budget hearing. I promise that the issue will not take very much time and will only involve questions addressed to one individual who is physically present at tonight's hearing. I do have prepared questions for Treasurer Wagner, but I will submit them in writing to the chair so that he can provide written answers prior to this budget hearing being reconvened at a later date. So, he has prepared on page 1 of the tentative budget, the upper left-hand corner, please pay attention, look at the upper left-hand corner. Controller Stalen has prepared this budget utilizing the accrual method of accounting. For most of you, that fact and its significance may not mean much. That is not intended as an insult. It is simply a fact that if one is not trained in finance and accounting, you would never be expected to understand what Controller Stalen and Superintendent Teal have done with this tentative budget. What they have done is simple. They have attempted to use this tentative budget to convince this Board of Education, the members of the Watch in this community, that there is evidence to support a $10 million working cash fund bond sale within the final approved budget for fiscal year 2021. On page 5 of 24 of the tentative budget, you will see that on the title of the page, the summary of cash transactions. Within page 5 of the tentative budget, it appears that Controller Stalen has removed from the various balances found in row 3 all cash that was actually received by the district from DuPage County Treasurer Glenn Henry for the 2019 tax levy prior to June 30th, 2020. To be clear, Controller Stalen has removed cash from the July 1st, 2020 balances that has actually been received on or before June 30th, 2020. That's what one does if utilizing an accrual method of accounting for a budget. However, the inclusion of a working cash bond sale within the 2021 budget is about cash on hand at the time the bills need to be paid. Another interesting point about Controller Stalen's fund reporting on page 5 is that unless Controller Stalen has reason to believe that there will be no distributions of the 2020 extension prior to July 1st, 2021, there will in fact be no outstanding working cash fund loan as of June 30th, 2021. Article 20 of the school code expressly requires school treasurer Eric Wagner to immediately repay that loan upon receipt of any part of the 2020 extension. Therefore, page 5 is a materially misstated record that actually distorts what will happen with regard to the timely distribution next May and June of the 2020 extension to the district in general and the education fund in particular. Additionally, this intentionally distorted picture of the future is being disseminated in order to support the issue of a totally unnecessary bond sale. Controller Stalen and Treasurer Wagner each are required to keep a separate set of books. This redundancy serves a purpose. 2 sets of books by 2 individuals builds in a check and balance so that both embezzlement and fraud become more difficult to execute. Given those subtractions of actual cash within this cash summary record, Row 3 does not actually reflect the cash balance on either July 1st, 2020 or June 30th, 2021 for the education fund. Within this summary, Controller Stalen has recorded a loan from the working cash fund to the education fund. The two cells are C6 and I-15. Next spring, Treasurer Wagner, as the legal custodian of the district's funds, will not need to request a lawful order from this board to execute the loan found within this budget. That is a fact. Due to the 2020 extension distribution next spring during May and June, the education fund will have approximately $30 million in the fund in cash as of June 30th, 2021. If the board president had invited Treasurer Wagner to be available tonight for questions, this hearing would have heard his testimony that as of June 30th, 2020, less than 3 months ago, the education fund had $31,608,184.24 in cash. This record was given to each member of the board as part of the July board packet. My question is, Witness Stalen, in preparing the tentative budget, are you in possession of any record drafted by either the Office of the DuPage County Clerk or the Office of the DuPage County Treasurer since February 1st, 2020, that addresses the anticipated timing of the certification of the collector's books next April by the clerk, or the mailing next May 1st by the treasurer of the 2020 tax bills? If so, have you provided that record to the members of the board as evidence that this district faces a cash flow issue next spring? If so, can we all see that record right now at this hearing?
You'd have to ask that. Your question was so convoluted. We are on the accrual basis. With the accrual basis, you defer, and we are elected by...
The question is, are you in receipt of anything from the county that says the tax receipts won't be timely next June?
No, I don't have...
You have not. The answer is no. Thank you. Within the bond transcript for this district's 1996A working cash fund bond sale is a record entitled Statement of Need for Working Cash and Tax Exemption Certificate and Agreement. Within that record, it states within section 2.2, the undersigned, Controller Stalen, hereby certifies and affirms thorough familiarity with the financial books and records of the district and of the fund. The undersigned, Controller Stalen, has caused the cash flow estimate to be prepared on the basis of revenues reasonably expected to be available and expenditures reasonably expected to be made by the district during the time periods set forth in said table. My question is, Witness Stalen, in preparing this tentative budget, a budget which includes your recommendation and the recommendation of Superintendent Teal that the board approve yet another working cash fund bond sale, the third since you arrived in the mid-90s, have you prepared the same 36-month cash flow summary to support your claim that in May and June of 2021, the education fund will be unable to pay its bills?
Based on the accrual basis of accounting, yes.
Based on an accrual?
Yeah. Which is, so the board...
But do you pay your bills on accrual, or do you pay your bills with cash?
We record them in our financial statements on the accrual basis.
But when you cut a check, it's cut with cash, correct?
We don't spend next year's cash now. We defer it. And that's a general accepted practice. Auditors have accepted it for my duration.
Well, that doesn't...
3 different types of auditors.
Your May Treasurer's report disputes that because you have deficit balances, which means you've spent money already, and for example, in the transportation fund, that you didn't have yet. So I don't believe that's an accurate description of what you do.
Well, okay, then don't believe it.
Well, I'm going to trust my eyes. I'm not going to trust you so much.
Excuse me for a
Members
minute.
of the Board of
Excuse me for a minute, please. Nancy, I'm
Excuse
interested.
me, I'm almost done.
No.
I believe this, if you have a question for me, please ask me, but please don't interrupt.
I'm wondering how much time we have to give you.
I already told you, it's as long as I want, and if you let me finish, I'm almost done.
I could move to close the public hearing, couldn't I?
No, that would be illegal.
Why? I don't know. I think we should let Mr. O'Connell finish. I will, at which point I will emphasize to everyone who's listening and for the record that we have external auditors.
I literally
I
have...
know. I've heard
here.
this song and dance before. Are there other people that we want to hear from too?
Well, this is the open hearing. We can restrict for 3 minutes at the end for
There's
the...
no time limit to a hearing.
but this is an open hearing. But I am going to ask you, Mr. O'Connell, to please finish explaining.
I am about to finish. Members of the Board of Education, 6 years ago this month, during a hearing held on September 15, 2014, for public comment and questioning on a proposed sale of $1,525,000 of funding bonds, I stated at that time that there was no need for the proposed bond sale. In fact, I called the proposed bond sale recommended by then Superintendent McDonald and Controller Stalin a fraud. That sale never took place. Tonight, I'm informing this board that the current Superintendent and Controller Stalin are once again attempting to bully yet another board into yet another unnecessary bond sale that could easily be construed to be fraudulent. There is absolutely no demonstrable need for a bond sale to fund a loan fund that will simply sit as yet another tempting source of funds for future expenses. I strongly urge each elected individual of this public body to vote no on this tentative budget and send it back to the desk of the superintendent with direction that the unnecessary working cash fund bond sale be removed and that the life safety fund and all of its assets and expenses be properly recorded. If this public body persists on the path of approving this budget as presented, this elected Board of Education will force the citizens of this community to conclude that you're using the current climate to sneak a backdoor bond sale onto their property tax bills, beginning with the 2020 extension. That concludes my testimony and my questions.
Is there anybody else who wishes to address the board?
Was there any
On the
comment
bond hearing.
online regarding this?
No, online.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Oh, thank you.
I'm checking.
While you're checking, I would just like to remind everyone that we not only have external auditors that audit our records annually, and we have had never any really substantive finding of any ill use of funds, but we did, in fact, Mr. O'Connell is somewhat correct in that we did lose money on a bond sale, and that was because of the assertions, the
That's right.
ill-founded assertions of Mr.
Right.
O'Connell
That's right.
that caused some people who were willing to invest to pull out. And
Right.
in fact, he has not only used the resources of this district, but has also caused financial harm to this district.
That's
So I'm
correct.
sorry that he is left to hear that. Perhaps he will listen to their tape. Would you agree?
I'd agree, right? He threatens what he does now. This is something he does so that he can try and threaten that there's illegality, some illegality involved with the issuance of the bond, and so that to try and discourage bidders who would come in and foil the project, so.
So he has in fact hurt our community,
And he may do that. He's done it with other schools.
and he's done it for 50
Well,
years as well.
Nancy, I might add too, that in addition to the audits that we have every year, we're also, our practices are recognized every year as being exemplary by
Right, and
outside
that would be
groups.
something.
3 weeks ago, for 21
Yeah.
years in a row, Mark and his team were
Correct.
awarded for financial excellence from the Association of School Board Officials.
And that is actually
21
something
years.
that would be picked at by the certificate committee if we were using the wrong fund or wrong, so he's reading it, you know, and I don't even know what year he got some of his beef information from, if sometimes it's decades old. So I feel pretty comfortable that we have a solid budget in place where
Yes.
he wants us to spend our deferred taxes from the next fiscal year. And that's a safety net for the board to defer our taxes. It makes us operate with a little bit smaller budget because we're taking our taxes from this year and moving into the next year and having to work with older taxes, so there's a small percentage difference. And it gives us a cash float, but only in if we ever decided not to do this, we would have to say, let's go back to the cash basis of accounting so that we can spend the money that's being deferred now. So it would weaken us financially, and so, and we wouldn't be following generally accepted accounting principles either, so because you don't do things on a cash basis anymore. You do it on an accrual basis and account for things in the right fiscal year.
Thank you. Do you have anybody?
I don't have comments from the public, I finally found them. But and I wasn't listening very carefully, but I just, as the superintendent of schools, want to just point out a couple of things about our budgets. One, we have been rated as a district of distinction for over 20 straight years for our financial practices. Two, every year we go through a thorough accounting process. The last, I think, 10 to 15 years of those audits are available on our district website. Anybody can go look at those and see if there was any significant deficiencies, weaknesses, or findings in those. Those are reported to the board every year, and then we talk about how we close any deficiencies in the rare case that they are found. Three, we spend the money in this district responsibly after it comes in. Many school districts spend on borrowed money, and when they hit springs like what we hit last year, then they are forced to go out and borrow money at high interest rates to close the gap for the remainder of the school year. This school district does not end up in that situation. The school district monitors its money, spends its money after it comes in rather than on loan. And many times, we are the school district that other school districts come to and borrow from us, and then we collect that interest from them at a high rate. Anybody who goes back through the books for the past decade plus will find that this district, this board, the financial team here have been excellent stewards of the taxpayers' money. And I will stand by that any day of the week. If the public is shaken by this at all, I encourage them to reach out to me, and we will happily sit down and answer any of the questions that come our way.
And on top of that, I just want to say that I'm just really disappointed that he didn't stay to hear this last little bit of comments that were made by our superintendent and the other members of the board and Mark Stalen. I think it was very important that when you come in and try to change things, to hear both sides of the situation. And that was not done, and I'm very disappointed that that would be brought forward and not.
I agree with you, and I would also say that I know that different members of administration have spent substantial amount of time trying to explain this time and time again.
Yes, and if there are things like this, I feel he had 30 days in order to come forward and...
This is the way he does it. I mean,
I know. This is
I mean, let's
unacceptable.
not put this on the individual. Let's move forward.
Yes.
Let's move forward. Are there any other questions related to the hearing?
Did this raise any other concerns or doubts among
Or do
board
we have a
members that
motion
you'd like
to
for us to address before you take action later this evening?
No,
Do we
no.
need to call the...
Close
We
the
need to
hearing.
close
We
the
need to
hearing.
close the hearing.
I move we close the public hearing.
Second.
Mike Terry.
Thank you. Mike Davenport.
Aye.
Terry Pavasich. Aye. Rick Pavanato.
Aye.
Joanna Vasquez Drexler.
Aye.
Dan Nicholas.
Aye.
And Nancy Kupka.
Aye. The hearing is closed. We will move on to the consent agenda. Now I need a motion for, is there any item that any member of the board wishes to remove from the consent agenda for further discussion?
No.
So hearing none, before we move, I would just like to call out a thank you, and I don't want to mispronounce their names.
Kevin and
The
Jean.
Clinton?
Lennon.
The Clements,
Yeah.
for their lovely donation of
Yes.
a cello and a concert-level cello and other supporting things. That's very kind of them, and a great boon to our music program.
Yes.
Hearing that, we're going to ask for a motion for the Board of Education to approve the consent agenda as presented, which includes A, personnel report, contract adjustment certified, appointments classified, B, personnel report, resignations classified, C, the financial pages, D, 2021 concussion oversight team, E, the amended and 2020-21 school calendar, and F, the acceptance of said donation from Kevin and Gina Clinton.
So moved.
Kevin
Second.
moves. I'm sorry, who seconded?
Me.
Mike.
Thank you very much. Terry Pavasich. Aye. Mike Davenport.
Aye.
Dan Nicholas.
Aye.
Rick Pavanato.
Aye.
Joanna Vasquez Drexler.
Aye.
And Nancy Kupka.
Aye, the consent agenda passes. We're going to move on to the recommendations for action. First thing we need is a motion for the Board of Education to approve the 2021 budget as presented.
So moved.
Second.
Mike and Joanna. Sorry.
Mike and Joanna?
Yes.
Thank you. Mike Davenport.
Aye.
Joanna Vasquez Drexler.
Aye.
Dan Nicholas.
Aye.
Terry Pavasich. Aye. Rick Pavanato.
Aye.
Nancy Kupka.
Aye.
Board
Motion-
member, oh, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. Say motion carried.
And board members need to sign the budget before they leave this evening.
Will do. Thank you.
Happily. Next, we need a motion for the Board of Education to approve the lowest acceptable bid and award Mechanical Concepts of Illinois a contract in the amount of $53,650 for the condensing unit replacement at the ASC.
So moved.
Second.
Was that you, Terry, seconding? Who seconded?
I did.
Terry seconded.
And Mike was
Mike
first.
was first.
Thank you. Mike Davenport.
Aye.
Terry Pavasich. Aye. Rick Pavanato.
Aye.
Joanna Vasquez Drexler.
Aye.
Dan Nicholas.
Aye.
Nancy Kupka.
Aye, motion carries. Next, we need a motion for the Board of Education to approve the 2020-2021 grants as presented.
So moved.
Second.
Mike and Joanna.
Thank you. Mike Davenport.
Aye.
Joanna Vasquez Drexler.
Aye.
Dan Nicholas.
Aye.
Terry Pavasich. Aye. Rick Pavanato.
Aye.
Nancy Kupka.
Aye, motion carries. And then we need a motion for the Board of Education to approve Board Policy 2.260, the Uniform Grievance Procedure, and Board Policy 2.265, Title IX Sexual Harassment Grievance Procedure.
So moved.
Second. Go ahead, Joanne.
Mike and Joanna.
Thank you. Mike Davenport.
Aye.
Joanna Vasquez Drexler.
Aye.
Dan Nicholas.
Aye.
Terry Pavasich. Aye. Rick Pavanato.
Aye.
Nancy Kupka.
Aye, motion carries. The next item for consideration is the issuance of not to exceed $10,300,000 in general obligation limited bonds to be issued by the district pursuant to Article 20 of the School Code for the purpose of increasing the district's working cash fund. The Board of Education will consider the adoption of a resolution providing for the issue of said bonds, glasses are fogging up, and the levy of a direct annual tax to pay for the principal and interest thereon. The resolution sets forth the parameters for the issuance of said bonds and sale thereof by designated officials of the district. Mark Stalen, District Controller, explained that the resolution sets forth the parameters for the issuance of said bonds and sale thereof by designated officials of the district. He summarized the pertinent terms of said parameters, including the specific parameters governing the manner of sale, length of maturity, rates of interest, purchase price, and levies and tax levy for said bonds. The title of the resolution is Resolution Providing for the Issuance of Not to Exceed $10,300,000 Taxable General Obligation Limited School Bonds of Community High School District Number 99, DuPage County, Illinois, for the purpose of increasing the working cash fund of said school district, providing for the levy of a direct annual tax to pay the principal and interest on said bonds, and authorizing the proposed sale of said bonds to the purchaser thereof. May I have a motion for the Board of Education to adopt said resolution as presented and read by title?
So moved.
Second.
Mike and Terry,
Thank you very much.
any discussion?
Nancy, did you mention this part of it with private sale or public underwriting with Raymond James?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you said, Mike.
There's
I put on my glasses, I couldn't hear you.
There's another part in there that's just in the last reading up on the screen, but it says, in the proposed sale of said bonds through a private placement or a public underwriting at Raymond James. What that does is I don't know if you saw.
I did not, thank you, I missed
Okay,
it. I was looking
it
at
needs to
the
be clear,
document.
because this is another piece he'll go after. He'll say that we didn't, the board didn't approve Raymond James being an underwriter for this project.
So to be clear, it's the resolution providing for the issue of not to exceed $10,300,000 taxable general obligation limited school bonds for the purpose of increasing the working cash fund, providing the levy of a direct annual tax to pay the principal and interest on said bonds, and authorizing the proposed sale of said bonds through a private placement or a public underwriting with Raymond James. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
That, I'm confirming that is my motion.
That is your motion, Mike?
And I second that.
And Terry seconds. Julie, and there's no more discussion?
No.
So Julie, please call a roll upon the motion to adopt said resolution.
Mike Davenport.
Aye.
Terry Pavasich. Aye. Rick Pavanato.
Aye.
Joanna Vasquez Drexler.
Aye.
Dan Nicholas.
Aye.
And Nancy Kupka.
Aye. The motion is carried and said resolution is duly adopted. Julie, please record this in the records of the Board of Education of Community High School District 99, DuPage County, Illinois. Thank you. Moving on to the second reception of visitors. This is the second reception of visitors, which is intended for audience members to address the board on any topic pertaining to Community High School District 99. Comments will be limited to 3 minutes to provide all visitors an equal opportunity to address the board. Individuals needing more time should submit their thoughts in writing to the board secretary, Mrs. Nidek. Visitors addressing the board need to come to the microphone and state their full name. The proceedings may be are being tape recorded for the purpose of producing accurate meeting minutes. The board's presiding officer, myself, reserves the right to modify these protocols if circumstances warrant. Audience observation of these protocols is appreciated. Would somebody like to address the board? It is appreciated, thank you.
Well, you've definitely earned your 3 minutes.
Glad to hear from you.
Somebody that failed math, too, and I had to listen to that. Okay. My name is Carrie Swenson. I have 2 kids. I've talked to some of you already. I have 2 kids in District 99, a junior and a senior. I had a nice timed speech. Hank, you blew it for me because you addressed everything that I had in my speech, all my concerns. Except,
Glad we could help.
as a board and as a school district that signed an oath, and I have the verbiage of your oath right here, specifically to what we're dealing with in our community right now. I am concerned. The numbers are wrong. DuPage County Health Department, Illinois State Department of Health told me the numbers are triple counted sometimes. The numbers of people not even living near us are coming back here. That's directly affecting these kids getting back to school based off of risk management that Hank, which we all want them to be safe. I'm not saying come back guns blazing, no mask, okay? But we can't do that really if we're restricting everything else based off of inaccurate information. I can give you the names and numbers that I've talked to. It is a problem. Other schools are going back less restrictive. Same populations, different counties. So as we move forward, I see your plan. I'm happy with it. It's a foot in the door. We're getting those kids that need to be back in school, and we have the choice for the remote learners. However, for 3 months, what if the flu season doesn't hit us? What if this flattened curve continues to be stagnant? What if the numbers change to 80,000 people in Illinois instead of that are positive instead of over 200,000 because of the triple, quadruple counting? So I know you have your metrics moving side to side, moving up and moving down. The fact that there's no room for more time, and I understand the scheduling, is concerning. We can't finish out the year like this. Are we waiting for the vaccine? Our numbers aren't that bad. So I think as a board and as an administration, you need to also be our voice for the community and ask the health department, what are these numbers from? Because even Dr. Ezeki today specifically said they're counted multiple times for one patient. You can only be a risk factor in the neighborhood once. You can't be a risk factor 3, 4, 5 times. So when we're talking about these metrics, it's really important to be using that accurate information. You are the stewards to our children. And we expect you. I have a voice. They have a voice. You all have voices. You are in charge of the education for these kids. I'm very happy that we're getting back with what we are. We have the foot in the door to show that we can do it right. These kids will wear a hazmat suit, stand on their head, and sing Old MacDonald if they can go back to school. You're not going to have a problem. I've talked to administrators. I have them in my family. They're thrilled to be back. So moving forward, that's the only thing I didn't see addressed. Thank you for the timer. And thank you for listening to me. Thank you, student board. And I do appreciate the work you put into all of this, so thank you.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
for coming.
Thank you.
Anybody else wish to address the board?
It's getting late, folks, sorry. I'm having trouble working technology.
Sir, could you raise your hand, scrub your nose, please?
Oh, sorry.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is David Fisher. I have a child at Downers Grove North. I didn't have anything written or pre-planned. I didn't plan on speaking until I signed in tonight. And I just wanted to start off by saying thank you to Hank and the entire...
Can you pull up your mask, Mr. Fisher? Sorry.
It's slipping, sorry.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say thank you to you, Hank, and to the elected officials of the board for handling things the way you've handled things. I know you're getting barraged with emails and angry parents and frustrated parents and passionate parents who are simply here to advocate for the wellness of their children. And I know that everybody here all has those same goals in mind when we're talking about our children. I'm very passionate. I'm a very passionate person. I'm very passionate about my children. So when I see my children on a daily basis going through the motions of what they're going through, and I talk to other parents like Carrie and groups of other people that are positively for the hybrid plan and returning to school now, we all have the same goals in mind. So I just wanted to say thank you to you all. I know that you have our students' best interests at heart, and like Carrie said, the numbers are bogus. They keep telling us that it's up to you guys to make the decision. So we're getting this back and forth. We feel like we're in the middle. So it's either the Illinois Department of Health is making the calls or you guys are making the calls. They're saying you guys need to make this call. And I'm glad that you're going back. I'm glad that you've got this plan in place, and I would say stay the course. I also want to thank all the people in the community that have started the Facebook grassroots movement of the hybrid learning that started in August, as well as the 400 plus families and members and parents that we created just 5 days ago. We went from 0 to 400 on a Facebook page, all in support of returning to school now in District 99. So for all those parents that are watching on YouTube and that have supported our little group.
Mr. Mask, please.
Sorry. We really appreciate it. So I just wanted to say that, stay the course. As long as the numbers are going to remain low, we really need our kids back, especially the special ed kids that have social and emotional needs because they're not getting it with remote learning. I don't care what you think or what you might say, but remote learning long-term doesn't work. I have 2 kids with IEPs, and I see their struggles, and I talk to other parents with kids who don't have IEPs. And normal kids with straight A grades struggle emotionally and socially in this environment. So remote learning long-term doesn't work, and you're cheating our children out of their rightful proper education by keeping them at home. So I'm glad that your plan is to get us back into the classrooms, be it in a hybrid, modified hybrid, but the ultimate goal is to get these kids back in school. That's all I have to say.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anybody else who'd like to address the board?
I'll be brief as well. My name is Lynn Golminus. I have a junior here at Downers Grove South this year. I have a freshman in college that graduated in the spring. He's at Purdue. He's starting his 4th week there, working through the hybrid classes, and he's very excited to be on campus. He had somewhat of an in-person orientation week, and he's very excited to still have a roommate, and I've been following the numbers, looking at the data. My background, I'm a chemist. I've been a substitute teacher in District 58 for many years since my kids have all been in school. So again, I'm with them, looking at the numbers. I don't think these numbers are right. My youngest son is a 6th grader at St. Joseph's School in Downers Grove. He's back at school. He's starting his 4th week at this time. I'm there. I'm working there as well this year, and so far we haven't had any problems with my older son, my younger son, my youngest son, and I'm looking forward to this hybrid plan. I hope it happens on the timeline that's set, because last time was really tough to hear the timeline, and then within a day or 2 before it was shot down. So I'm keep praying for the truth and the right data and the right interpretation. So I thank you all for your time, and we've been very happy with District 99. So I hope we can continue and move forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Anybody else wish to address the board? Okay. What? Thank you for coming out. You know, I just want to...
I do have a couple of virtual comments.
Oh, go ahead, sorry. I keep forgetting that.
Yeah. Okay. Let me zoom in so I can actually read it. My eyes are getting tired as the night goes on here. All right, the first comment is from Sandy Bull-Freeberry. While I appreciate all the effort by our teachers and administration, I can't help but put my child first. When I look at the fact that we're delivering 8 to 10 less weeks of instructional time in any back-to-school plan, but Dr. Thelia said that the curriculum will be 80% at most. Teachers are admitting to teaching content with numbers like 50 to 60%, and remote learning fatigue will reduce even that. I'm having a very difficult time being the positive support I know that my child needs while reconciling the part-time schools she's being provided. We already know that she will have to repeat chemistry with the nightmare that spring learning was, and already feels that she will have to repeat physics. High-level science classes are not best taught virtual or halfway, and so she struggles to stay engaged. It is a throwaway class in her mind, and it's part-time school. I don't know how to find a teacher for her. Let's be honest, a tutor isn't what she needs if she's being provided half the curriculum. She doesn't know what she's missing. I know. The tutor won't know. I am dismayed that we haven't been able to find ways to bring critical courses, math, science, lit, lang arts to our kids in a way that produces real benefit and not just more busy work and memorization for a test. The instructions for AP exams came out and I disregarded. There is no way she has learned enough in the last 8 months or been brought out of a horrible funk to re-engage her brain, critical thinking, test-taking skills that we would waste any money or incur through additional depression from poor performance on taking those tests. My child has worked so hard since she was 3 to be a great student, and her immobility and disengaged mentality has us both crying most every day. I don't care if we go back or stay remote. I care that one of those plans delivers more than part-time school, that we have a plan that has teachers really reaching these kids, that there's more support and more engagement. Today, as usual, she said she doesn't see the benefit of going to college since nothing means anything anymore. My school-loving, honor roll, overachieving kid has had the love of learning sucked right out of her, and I blame the Board of Ed for District 99 for that. Find a solution, please. The next comment is from Frank D. Vitale. While I'm grateful that I live in a state that takes the pandemic seriously, I hope the school board understands that the Illinois public health officials prioritize keeping hospital ICU beds open over keeping everyone virus-free. Maintaining 6 feet of distance does not keep everyone safe. It merely means that people will get sick at a rate that our hospitals can treat. Furthermore, I'd like to remind the school board that the district spends a lot of resources in supporting the Young Hearts for Life program, where we celebrate every time we find a young person with an undiagnosed heart problems. There is a growing body of evidence that teens and persons of all ages wind up with serious long-term heart and lung problems even if they are asymptomatic. Because of these reasons, I certainly support continuing fully remote learning. Those are all of the public comments that came in virtually.
Did Ms. Swenson want to speak again? I'm sorry.
What?
I thought, Ms. Swenson, did you raise your hand to speak again? I'm sorry.
She said she was joking.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you, yes, I thought you wanted to speak again. Oh, okay, I'm sorry. I just didn't want to.
I would just like to add, I know it's frustrating. I mean, nobody, I don't think anybody believes that anything short of in-person education is really what all of our kids would want or deserve. But I really want to commend administration because people are doing the best that they can under very difficult circumstances. Incorrect data? Undoubtedly, probably. But it's all the only data we have. So at the heart of this, we have to keep our students safe. And we all have to, and if we really want to get back to school in person, and we really want to do things the best for their students, we really have to do the only things we know. This is a novel virus, but the things we have to do are well documented in the medical literature. Wearing masks, staying home when you're sick, staying 6 feet away. It's what we've got, and it's got to be done not only in school, but outside of school in the community. Because short of a vaccine, we can still reverse the tide of the virus. And it's only by these concentrated efforts consistently and doggedly by all of us that we will. So I have to throw that in as a, nurse of 40 years who spends 10 hours a day working with patients with COVID, and in fact had one die today. I'm telling you, it is out there, and it is not something to be trifled with. I'm just giving myself an opportunity. Okay.
But that doesn't mean that an entire education system needs to be completely shut down unless we have accurate information.
But the education system has not been shut down.
Less than 200 children, or about 240 children vaccinated, COVID-related or COVID only. That's something we need to look at. So if we're going to have a dialogue, I would love it, Nancy, but I don't think this is the time or place. I would love if you want to email me, you can go ahead and share my record.
Well, you were able to express your opinion, and now I am expressing mine. And I would say 240 deaths. I don't want one of my children to be one of those deaths.
I don't want them to die from either.
Yeah, I agree. Anybody else want to say anything before we go on? Okay, moving on, let's go to the reports. Report on Legislative Education Network of DuPage.
There's been a couple emails this past week. I could summarize, but I think everybody has them. If you don't have those Lend emails, let me know. I'll forward them over to you.
Thank you. SASD?
SASD accepted a gift of 500 face shields from District 99 Foundation. So on behalf of SASD, I would like to express a heartfelt thanks. SASD is in the process of its rolling opening. September 28th was the target date. However, it's obvious we're not going to make that target date, and it will be October 6th to begin with hybrid instruction. Let me see. All staff are currently providing remote instruction there, and there is the possibility of in-person related services. Most of SASD staff are currently working from home, but do have access to the administration center. PPE kits have been prepared for staff, and member districts have provided assistance with devices for students and administration and getting them to the students as soon as possible.
Thank you, Julia. District 99 Education Foundation?
Yes, we wanted to let faculty know that we're still doing mini grants for things that they may need for their classrooms or for remote learning, anything. So please, we're going to shorten the form so that they can turn it in faster for their department chairs and for the superintendent to look at before it comes to us. And we are still taking money for the COVID families in crisis. Those can be sent to the, I think there's a button on the
Foundation.
computer.
Foundation website.
Page.
Yeah, sorry. And then we also are trying to work on how we can do Pizza Wars remotely. And we may be doing a coupon book or something to that nature. And we really wish we could be doing Pizza Wars in real time, but with the way things are, we don't know. And we just approved our mission, vision, and goals, and our bylaws were approved. So we are on the road. I don't think I forgot anything, did I?
No, I think you got it all.
I think
d99ef.org is the website.
Yes, thank you, thank you.
Thanks, Tara. Thanks, Hank. And Illinois Association of School Boards?
Yeah, even though the Triple I has been, conference has been canceled this year, the delegate assembly goes forward virtually, so I have a orientation virtual session I got to go through in another week or so, and then there's 2 discussion periods that'll take place virtually in October, and then in November we'll have our actual delegate assembly. But they've kind of broken it into some pieces so that we're not trying to go back and forth with presentations and discussion during the actual assembly as much, trying to get that stuff done ahead of time. So that's what I'll be involved in a little bit the next couple months. I'll report back in, let you know what's going on.
Thanks, Mike. Upcoming board meetings, October 5th, 2020, we'll have a workshop at 6:30. I'm assuming that's here?
We're still,
To be determined. And then October 19th, we'll have our business meeting at 6:30, to be
to be
determined.
determined, yeah.
We need a motion to, we have no closed session, we need a motion to come out.
No, we have no closed session.
I'm sorry, we need a motion to adjourn, I'm sorry.
So moved.
Terry moves,
I'll second that motion.
Mike seconds, all those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Thank you all, we are adjourned. Remember, I need all.
Thank you, board. You all need
You
to
all
sign
have
the
to sign the